Welcome to IIIT Bangalore. Those of you who are online for this particular workshop on 6G technology, standards, regulation, and ethics. This is part of the project that we have been doing with the Consumer Unity Trust and Society CUTS International, as well as the Australian Risk Policy Institute. I'll give some more details later on, but at the outset, I would like to invite Dr. Debabrata Das, Director of IIIT Bangalore, to give you the welcome address. Dr. Das needs no introduction. He has been a veteran of communications, both in terms of research as well as industry participation for quite some time. He's the chair of the IEEE India Council. He has a number of patents. He has peer-reviewed papers totaling more than 300 in the area of communications technologies and engineering. So over to you, Dr. Das, to welcome the participants, both in person and online, to IIIT Bank for this workshop.
Thank you, Professor Sridhar, for that kind introduction. And I'm really overwhelmed to see that 6G workshop is happening in our campus along with our IIIT Bangalore and an Australian university in this regard. And before I go into my brief speech and welcome, first of all, I warm welcome to all the dignitaries here in the campus attending in IIIT Bangalore, and also the dignitaries in the online who has been here. And there is a lot of people attending online, and thanks all of you for attending this workshop on 6G. And in the 6G, the three things which the workshop talks about, very, very important. One is called technology, second is called standard, and third is regulation. Very nicely, the title is because all three are the very important pillars to start this workshop and the discussion. My special thanks to Professor Sridhar and the team who have been discussing and made this workshop today possible, and also the Dr. Lakshmi, Dr. Milin, Dr. Ram, and all my student friends and colleagues across sitting at here. So let me go very quickly there, because let me talk about the standard first, because without standards, we cannot make any products. And as we know, the standard is practically drives the whole world in the communication, because without standard, we cannot communicate single bit of any communications. That means forget about whole informations. One bit, if I don't have a standard, then I communicate, then my receiver will not receive. So it has to be well defined between transmitter, receivers, and also all the higher layers of the protocols to make any communication successful, whether it is you are using internet or telecommunications or any kind of communication on this earth. So as we know, the 5G standards have been done, and almost in the final stages of now. A lot of research is happening and deployments are happening. 6G is taking off. 5G mainly focused on three major areas. The whole world of communications moved to the three major areas called embedded mobile broadband, enhanced mobile broadband, and also the massive machine type communications and ultra reliable low latency communications. If you look at all categories of communication has brought into these three major bullet points under the 5G. Again, I repeat those things called enhanced mobile broadband and massive machine type communication and ultra reliable low latency. So these three are mainly enhanced mobile broadband, which is, you know, that broadband we used only for speaking or video conference, but it has moved to much higher than that in case of 5G when we do the wireless communications and massive IoT and all. And ultra reliable will be used for driverless car and all those kind of things. First time I enjoyed only 3 weeks back in 101 in highway in the California. I was driving, I'll not take the company's name. I was on a driverless car in a highway going around 120 kilometers per hour, and completely steering is controlled by the car. So I was practically, there was a matter of concern inside because that was the first drive of mine in a driverless car in a highway where 120 kilometers I'm moving, and both the sides there are other vehicles. And so that shows that wireless communications and driverless cars is working. And driver was sitting just keeping the hand 2 inches away from the steering, but it was completely driverless. So that shows that the first critical application, which is now happening in this wireless communication, and also that inside the car, there is a car network is there, CAN is there, so that is taken care of. But one thing I wanted to tell all of you, particularly the younger generation, this 5G will move from 1%, will move to 1% human communication and 99% of machine-to-machine communication. That is a big, big jump, and change happens from, because classical 3G, if you look at, and before or up to 4G, mainly it was a voice calls, video calls, internet, and all human was, majority of the communication was the human. But in the 5G onwards, 1% will be human because it's a 7 billion human being. But if 7 billion has a, one person has 100 IoT devices or things, 7 into 100 is 700 billion. So IoT devices will be 700 billion. So it is 1:99%. So machine-to-machine communication, decision-making by AI ML devices. So communication has a paradigm change from human to human communications to machine-to-machine communication. The ratio is 1 versus 99%. So whole paradigm of standardization has changed from 5G to 6G, because in human communication, there is a error is acceptable up to certain percentage. Means if I say hello, if hey doesn't reach, low only reach, I as a human brain, I can say, hey, hello, he has said. But in case of machine, if one bit doesn't reach, the machine may take a wrong decision and there may be an accident, or maybe in automation, robots may do a wrong thing. So the high ultra reliable and reliability was a big, big, big things. So I'm coming to the 6G, then from 5G to the 6G when they moved, only 3 months back, 3.5 months back, only the first draft of the 6G came out from the ITU-3GPP standard body, where India has a huge push in that and brought in a couple of points there, and it has incorporated in the draft. So if I come to the 6G and I will look at that, only 6 major points in the 6G standards people have talked about. One is called massive communication, then called the first point is massive communication, and second point is immersive communication, and third point is hyper reliable and low latency communication. These 3 were the extension of the 5Gs, but they added 3 more new topics is called integrated sensing and communication. That is the thing added in the 6G, and artificial intelligence and communication. And the last is that ubiquitous connectivity, because so many IoT devices are coming in. So I will finish my welcome with this inauguration is saying that all these 6 points, what has happened from the 5G to 6G, the performance level has to be improved. If the 5 millisecond was the delay, now the people are talking about 0.1 millisecond. So that means my delay has to be much lesser than the previous one. So now I'm coming to the last point called the technology. From technology point of view, these kind of things are not easy to deploy from system point of view as the delay is concerned and reliability is concerned, because every system has its own delay because of its software, hardware, inherent delays from the, but theoretically we can derive some ideas and all rich, but when you deploy on the systems after the standardizations, it will take us really challenge. So there is a good amount of challenge for the researchers and good amount of challenge for the engineers to make the systems which will come out from the standards. And so now, lastly, about the regulation, I think Professor V. Sridhar is the best person to talk about that, where he has done a lot of research on that. So I'll not talk about that bullet, but the other 2, the technology and the standards are going on in a very good way as the 6G is concerned. India's 6G vision just developed, and IIIT-Bangalore is a part of it, along with the IIIT Comet Foundation. If you can visit Dr. Milind's lab, which is 2nd floor here in this building, and there are huge advanced communication in the 5G and the 6G are happening. Dr. Milind is here. You can take his time and go and visit particularly and see how the things are happening. So with this, I wish Professor Sridhar and team a wonderful workshop and wonderful discussion. Thank you.
So, dear Director, thank you very much for your insights on 6G. I mean, definitely there are a lot of things which are going to happen when we move from 5G to 6G. So now I'll just give you a short presentation on the technologies and standards of 6G, followed by the panel discussion. I'm Sridhar from the Center for IT and Public Policy at IIIT-Bangalore. I've been the co-principal investigator for this particular project. To give you a gist of what this particular project is, it's three parties are involved in this particular project, IIIT-Bangalore, CUTS International, and the Australian Risk Policy Institute in Australia. It's funded by the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade under the Australia-India Cyber and Critical Technology Partnership Project. So we had, in this particular project, we had 4 research components. The first one is understanding the technology, along with the various types of risks that are associated with it, as highlighted by Professor Das a little while ago. Research component 2 is to develop some strategic opportunities between India and Australia for nurturing 6G. The third component is understanding the whole standard development process and where we are with respect to 6G standards, about which Professor Das hinted a little bit. Then the research component 4 is identifying the critical elements of regulatory and ethical guidelines with respect to the implementation of 6G. So these are the 4 components. So the first part will cover RC1 and RC3, that is technology, security risks, vulnerabilities associated with 6G, and also some aspects of 6G standards. The second panel is going to cover RC3, which is, RC4, which is identifying the regulatory and ethical guidelines for 6G. So we have very enlightened experts, both in panel 1 as well as panel 2, and therefore it will be a good opportunity for all of us here in person as well as online to hear their views on where 6G is going. So the methodology that we used for this particular project, since 6G is still evolving, is basically based on expert interviews, panel discussions that we have had with many experts here in India as well as in Australia, and also a lot of literature survey on some of the recent happenings with respect to technology and standards in 6G. We have also used something called as a strategic risk policy framework, which is developed by RP to introduce identifying the security risks associated with 6G and the responses towards mitigating the same. So I'll just briefly go through, most of these things have been highlighted very, extensively by Professor Das earlier. But if you look at 6G, what are we aiming at? We are aiming, as Professor Das discussed earlier, extremely low latency. We are going to have billions of connected devices. That's what the 6G is expected to support. So the density of devices per unit area is going to be very high, and that will be supported by 6G. And terahertz communication. So we are basically moving from millimeter wave in 5G to terahertz communication. That's roughly about 3 terahertz or something like that. So extremely high frequency, very focused beam-based communication, and therefore extremely large bandwidth are possible in 6G. So the application areas in 6G are briefly indicated here. I think Professor Das also discussed about this. Internet of nano things. We are moving from Internet of Things to Internet of Everything to Internet of Nano Things, which means that it's going to be very, very small IoT devices which are going to be connected by 6G with very high density. Connected autonomous vehicles. So we are basically looking at a lot of applications in which tactile internet can work. For example, robotic surgeries from very distant locations, autonomous self-driving cars, and all those are possible because of the extremely low latency that 6G can provide. 3D communication. So we are actually moving from 2D to 3D, and therefore the infrastructure that's going to be developed also has to take into account not the 2 dimensions, but also the 3rd dimension, height and things like that when the communication happens. One of the important things for which these standards are still being developed is molecular communication. So you're actually moving away from radio communication to molecular communication, where biochemical molecules can actually transmit information from origin to destination. The application area is intra-human body communication. So we have discussed, just in the news about brain implant recently. So there will be a lot of, it's possible in the future to have a lot of implants within the human body, and these implants can actually talk to one another, right? Brain to, arm to, heart and things like that. So those are all possible because of this new technology called molecular communication, so which does not use radio communication, but uses biochemical molecules in order to communicate. So these are all the new possibilities in 6G. So hence it is going to be much, much different from the 5G that we have been discussing about. So this also Professor Das, clearly highlighted it. So across all these parameters, for example, the peak data rate is going to be greater than 1 terabits per second. The mobility that 6G can support goes from 100 to 1,000 kilometers per hour. So even at 1,000 kilometers per hour, the communication will go on seamlessly, right? Because that's the goal of 6G. The latency is going to be in very microseconds. So that provides the possibility of using tactile internet and other applications. Devices, as we discussed before, are going to be billions per kilometer square. The spectral efficiency in 6G is expected to be much, much higher than we have for 4G and 5G. It's going to be 15 times more spectrally efficient compared to 4G and 5G. So especially because we are going to be using terahertz communication, very high frequency communication for high bandwidth applications. Network energy efficiency is also expected to be higher, right? Therefore, we can use low power devices because these are going to be very high frequency beamform communication. Therefore, we can use small devices in order to communicate as well. So our Bharat 6G vision has been announced in March 2023, is there in Department of Telecommunications website. In fact, we are fortunate to have Srimati Meenakshi Agarwal from IIIT, who is going to be there in the next session to discuss about our government's vision on 6G. So we have a roadmap, design and develop 6G network technologies that provide ubiquitous. The important thing is ubiquitous, intelligent, and secure connectivity for high-quality living experiences for the world. So this is our 6G vision, which has been announced in March. Now, to give you a highlight of challenges, we have looked at a lot of positive aspects. It's going to be ultra fast. Everything is ultra, right? You can put ultra in. So ultra mobility, ultra fast, ultra bandwidth, ultra high, low latency, and so on. But there are going to be some important challenges. One is cybersecurity. So definitely all these devices, including, as Professor Das mentioned, not only communicate with humans, but with devices, Internet of Nano things, and therefore security of these have to be preserved. So one of the aspects that is being discussed in most of the 6G research is zero trust system. You don't trust anyone or anything coming into the network. You treat them as going to be invaders, right? So the zero trust systems are going to be very important for 6G system, right? Because most of the security attacks can also happen not from humans, but from bots and automated agents and things like that. And therefore, we need to have foolproof trust. The second one is infrastructure readiness. That's one thing, most of the times we see 4G, 5G, but our call drops, right? So, for example, the new chairman of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India was taken over since yesterday. He first thing he said is call drops have to be minimal, right? So, which means that our infrastructure has to cope up with the access technology that we are implementing. Access is okay, perfect, 4G, 5G, 6G. But what about backend? Backhaul capacity in India, especially in developing countries, is very poor. Fiberization is very poor. Roughly 60 to 70% of inter-cell communication takes place through microwave. We don't have fiber coming even in the urban areas. So unless the backhaul capacity is also in bits per second, we will not have end-to-end connectivity possible. So extensive fiberization is required. Of course, if you look at the new Telecom Act, we have included a lot of new ways of getting the right of way, especially for the service providers, so that they can provide fiber to home and fiber to apartments and things like that. So that will definitely improve the backhaul capacity. It's going to be short-range communication because we are talking about terahertz communication, and therefore we have to use street furniture, right? So, for example, we have just seen Airtel deploying 5G small cells in our academic block. So the antenna is going to be very, very small, and it has to use street furniture, right? And lampposts and things like that. And therefore, we need to develop a lot of infrastructure for short-range communication. The third most important aspect is spectrum management. So, there is always a tussle of whether to license the spectrum or unlicense the spectrum. The internet firms want unlicensed spectrum, whereas telcos want licensed spectrum. So there's going to be, again, a dispute between the telecom service companies, telcos, and the internet firms with respect to how to allocate licensed versus unlicensed spectrum. It's not very clear what other bands will going to be opened up in 6G. Now, up to 5G, we have opened up 2.4, 5 gigahertz, and also 6 gigahertz. The recently concluded WRC 23 has announced partial opening of the 6 gigahertz for unlicensed spectrum. But we are not sure what is going to be unlicensed spectrum in the 6G, especially in the terahertz. So that needs to be discussed. So in fact, the US Federal Communication Commission has just released 95 gigahertz to 3 terahertz for 6G. And we are not sure whether it is going to be licensed or unlicensed, but already some progress has been made in the US. Evolving technical standards. So technical standards are going to emerge over a period of time. So I will just briefly go through it because of the want of time. So risks posed by 6G, the first one is security attacks. So in the report that we will be publishing with Professor Amrita Mishra, who is going to be here soon, on the different kinds of security attacks, all the way from the physical layer to the application layer. A lot of security attacks can happen, and therefore we need to have good risk management. The 6G networks can also have crypto attacks, quantum attacks, and things like that. And therefore, we need to have some mechanisms to counteract them. As Professor Das discussed, AI and ML is going to be playing a very important role in 6G. So because we are going to be using intelligent autonomous agents at the edges, so there's going to be a lot of algorithms which will be running at the edges. The objective is to improve performance, but at the same time, it can be used for something else as well, right? For security attacks, for privacy, privacy and data use and things like that. And therefore, this is going to have a lot of vulnerable points, and therefore, we need to have detection mechanisms for the same. Cyber warfare is definitely possible. So most of the attacks today not happen on individuals and business computers, but on critical information infrastructure of the country at large. And therefore, these cyber warfare is going to be very, very important. Therefore, we need to have some regulatory framework across countries in order to deal with some of these vulnerabilities in 6G. So that's a brief overview of what we are looking at with respect to technology. I'll just briefly discuss in about 5 minutes the standardization process. So we have seen the standardization process here. So we are roughly in release 18. So release 18, 2023, the whole of 2023, we'll see more and more releases. Release 18 being implemented by most of the telecom service providers. This is 3GPP. I'm just talking about 3GPP. So release 19 is going to be 25, and we are basically looking at release 21, which is going to happen in 2030. The standardization of 6G. So 6G standardization will be at sort of implementation stage only by 2030. So we are thinking ahead. Hopefully, we are thinking ahead. So that is the timeline, right? So probably some initial releases might happen in release 20, but we are basically looking at release 21 by 2030 to release 6G standards. So, as we move forward, this IMT standardization process is going on, and therefore there is a lot of things to be discussed. So if you look at it, Telecom Standards Development Society of India, TSDSI, which is the nodal standards development organization in India, has been very successful. In fact, implementing 5GI standard, India standard, that has been formally included in the release 17 new radio specifications. 6G standardization effect are set to start. In fact, the government has formed the Technology Innovation Group for 6G, and it has also announced the pillars for 6G vision. There are about 6 technology innovation groups which have been formed to jumpstart the 6G standardization process. TSDSI has also submitted 6G vision to ITUR. But if you look at other countries, for example, I think Madam Lakshmi is here. So research and development, for example, China and the US as of now own about 40.3% of all the patents which have been filed for 6G. Followed by Japan, Europe, South Korea, and so on. I think I've heard recently, I'm not sure, I think Professor Das can also comment on that. I think about 100 or so patents have been filed so far with respect to 6G by India, but we still have a long way to go in terms of patents. So it is very important for us to sort of follow up the vision that has been proposed by the government of India and the 6 technology groups that have been formed in order to promote our interest in the standard making bodies such as 3GPP. Now, note about Australia. The important thing about India and Australia is that we are in the same ITU region 3. And therefore, ITU region, International Telecommunications Union, has formed a lot of regions. And region 3, Asia and Asia Pacific region, in which India and Australia are part of it. And therefore, it is very important for India and Australia as 2 major countries in the ITU region 3 in order to communicate our efforts towards standardization process. In fact, we have not been really successful. For example, spectrum is one of the areas in which we don't have common standards across the countries. But at least in the ITU 3 region, we should be able to sort of put forward our recommendations for standardization. Also, we need to build a lot of capacity. For domestic firms, the SCPs have been playing a major role in telecommunications, standard essential patents using FRAND. But we have to, there are a lot of disputes which are going on. I think Madam Lakshmi knows more about it. But we need to have more standard essential patents which are available using easy to use terms such as FRAND, so that it will be possible for us to sort of develop 6G forward. So that is a brief about technologies and standards. I just have 1 minute more, but if there is any question from in person or online, I can take it. And after that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Millen. So we'll start the first panel discussion on 6G technologies and standards. This is going to be moderated by Dr. Milan Gandhe. He is currently the CEO of Comet Foundation, which is housed here in IIIT Bangalore. It's foundation. It's an incubation setup for advanced communication services, and he has been playing a very vital role in lot of technology developments, especially in 5G and advanced 5G. I know Dr. Milan for quite some time because we worked very closely at Sasken Technologies earlier, and he is a product of IIT Mumbai. And he worked in the communications industry for quite some time at Sasken Technologies and also with Tata Elxsi before coming here to IIIT Bangalore. So over to you, Dr. Milan, for moderating this particular session.
Thank you, Professor Sridhar, and thanks for this opportunity to moderate such a wonderful and eminent panel. We have four panelists today. We have Dr. Amrita Mishra, Mr. Bharat Bhatia, Dr. Ekant Sharma, and Mr. Jishnu Arvindaksham. So Dr. Amrita is an assistant professor and an associate warden at IIIT Bangalore. Her research interests lie in design development of physical technologies. So principally physical layer for the 5G and 6G, applications of signal processing and machine learning, unified network design architecture, and sparse signal processing, IoT. So generally the area that we are talking about. Mr. Bharat Bhatia is going to join a little late because he's at ITU in Geneva, but he has more than 45 years of experience in telecom and ICT. ICT Policy, Regulations and Spectrum Management. He's the president of ITU-APT Foundation of India and the vice chairman of Global Wireless Research Forum for Asia Pacific. Mr. Bhatia also chairs the PPDR working group under ITU and APT. Earlier, he was also president of TEMA, which is India's Telecom Equipment Manufacturers Association. Oh, Mr. Bhatia is here. Welcome, sir. And he was the vice president of Association of Telecom Industries of Singapore. Thank you, sir, for joining us from Geneva. Our third panelist is Dr. Ekant Sharma. He's joining us from Snowbound Roorkee. He's an assistant professor at IIT Roorkee and a co-founder and director at a startup called Mantis Wave Networks Private Limited. The main focus of his research is in the design and optimization algorithms for beyond 5G and 6G wireless communication systems that can provide multi-gigabit data rates and also improve energy consumption and spectrum utilization by orders of magnitude. Our last participant is Mr. Jishnu Arvindaksham, who is the principal product architect at Tejas. Welcome, Jishnu. Jishnu is the principal architect at the CTO's office at Tejas. He's been driving the company's long-term technology roadmap. He's been actively engaged in development of standards at ITUT, SG15, ITUR, WP5D, and 3GPP RAN1 SA2. He's also successfully coordinated TSDSI efforts for the inclusion of TSDSI's 5GI at IMT 2020 at ITU. He's also steered the development of CIPRI, front haul standard at TSDSI. He has more than 16 patents and is currently focused on 5G advanced evolution, IIoT, and network slicing. So a very, very eminent panel. I'm going to, first steal a little bit of bandwidth to talk about Comet, right? So that's my commercial, 30 minutes commercial break, 30 seconds commercial break. And then we'll get into the panel, right? So Comet is a technology innovation hub that has been established under DST's National Mission for Interdisciplinary Cyber Physical Systems. And this hub is basically focused on commercializing technologies in the advanced communication systems space. As a hub, we've said that we will not support too many projects. Instead of trying to diffuse our resources, we focused them very, very sharply on two very specific areas. One is the ORAN efforts in the country in terms of building indigenous 5G equipment. And the second area that we've picked is reconfigurable intelligent surfaces, because we think that that is going to be a very important component of the standards as 6G evolves. So there's a little bit of a 5G play and there's a little bit of a 6G play. So, with that 30-second commercial break, let's get to the panel. So here is how I look at it retrospectively, right? If you go back maybe 10, 15 years when 4G was getting rolled out, a lot of people were asking the question, why does a country like India need 4G at all, right? And I used to always joke that the killer application for 4G was actually bandwidth, right? Because back in those days, number of subscribers was growing, and essentially network providers were trying to figure out how to support more subscribers with the limited network bandwidth that they had, the limited number of base stations that they had. And so because 4G had better spectral efficiency, it was a natural solution to replace 3G. And you saw that was the incentive for network operators. But from a consumer perspective, I think the killer app really came when people started watching large quantities of video. And that really, really, to my mind, drove consumer adoption of 4G. In the last 18 months, I think the country has done amazing. It's really achieved a miracle in terms of just the spread of 5G network. I saw a map the other day of what India's 5G network looked like 18 months ago and what it looks like today. And there's a sea change, right? There's a complete revolution. But again, my suspicion is if you'll ask an average consumer, what is the difference in terms of applications that you're seeing in 5G? I don't think the average consumer is seeing too much of a difference. There is some talk that I hear every once in a while that, people are looking at machine to machine sort of applications. I have not personally heard of any large scale deployments of that nature. But clearly, the network operators once again seem to be adopting it more from a spectral efficiency perspective, right? Because again, now we've got even more subscribers. So, my opening invitation to the four panelists is perhaps you would want to share your thoughts on what are the consumer drivers and what are going to be the network operator drivers to make this transition over the next 10 years from 5G to 6G. And Mr. Bhatia, if I can begin with you, and then we'll go around the table.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I think you have really started the ball right in the right direction because as a consumer, most people are saying, oh, what is the use of 5G? It's almost same as what 4G were doing. But if I just look back at the history, maybe last 100 years, the first communication that basically started by connecting places. You all remember that old black phone in your home or office. It never connected people, it just connected places. So you have a phone at one place and phone at another place, and they were talking to each other. Then came our 2G and 3G, where people got connected. So we could speak to each other in wherever we were on the move. Then it came connecting things. That's where we are now, actually connecting things. And although we don't realize the connecting things part of it, we say it's only the data, but really there are hundreds of things around us which are talking to each other, which we don't normally realize. I don't know how many of you use the UPI payment. What UPI payment is doing is it is connecting your bank, it is connecting your mobile phone, it is connecting your the grocery fellow or whosoever you're paying. So many things are getting connected directly without us even realizing that all these things are getting connected using 4G technology or 5G technology. And a lot of things are connected today on the industry side. I don't know whether you heard about this Mercedes factory in Germany. All of the work that is done in Mercedes assembly is based on the 5G. So, and there are thousands and thousands of sensors, etc., working together, connecting each other. So connecting things is happening, although it is so ubiquitous that you don't even realize that things are connecting to each other. Then what do we go from there? So we already connected places, we already connected people, we already connected things. But next thing that is happening is we are going to connect the intelligence. And that is what 6G is all about. It is beyond connecting things. It is now moving into areas where you are going to maybe at some day, what is transpiring in your mind could be connected to things. So you could actually think, oh, can I see another channel? And the channel will change. Being a part of ITU, actually, I'm sitting right now in the ITU building itself. ITU has just completed the development of the 6G framework. We used to call it vision earlier. So every technology had a vision. There was a 3G vision, there was a 4G vision, there is a 5G vision. But the vision for 6G has been completed, and I will take 1 second just to tell you what does it contain. It has 6 angles. If you remember 5G, it had 3 angles. It was EMBB, the enhanced mobile broadband, MMTC, massive machine type communication, and URLLC, ultra reliable low latency communication. That was the 3 angles of a triangle, which was the famous triangle for 5G. For the 6G now, there is a hexagon. And that hexagon, I will quickly read out what those 6 sides of the hexagon are. and you will see the intelligence coming out of that. It has integrated sensing and communication. It has integrated AI and communication. It has immersive communication. It has massive communication. It has ubiquitous connectivity. It has hyper reliable and low latency communication. So these are the kind of things that will be developed over a period of next 5-6 years to form the basis of the 6G framework that has now been approved. And the time frame has also been agreed up to 2030. It has to be completed. I'm actually in the working party 5D meeting right now, which was responsible for creating this 6G framework. We call it IMT 2030, and it will be ready in 2030. And it will have many, many new things that will actually really show to the people that it is not just higher bandwidth, not just watching videos, but the lot more is going to come in the 6G. So with that, I will just stop here. I have a lot more things to say, but maybe later on I can say, depending on the time availability. Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Bhatia, for that perspective from ITU. My question, just following up on what Mr. Bhatia said to you, Jishnu, is given where ITU is drawing the 6G vision, how is the industry gearing up to address this 6G vision?
So, thank you, first of all. Thank you, Professor Sridhar and Milind, for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. We are Tejas Networks. We are right next to this building. So I usually walk by every day or for my afternoon work. So it's good to come inside and speak as well. So first thing is that as Bhatia sir just mentioned, so we actually, the first thing usually what triggers the next generation of usage is the devices. So hopefully the Apple Vision Pro would start off the real usage of 5G. 4G was actually triggered by Apple, if you remember, from an iPhone perspective. So the devices, though we build network, usually the devices drives the next wave of innovation. And when I think the Vision Pro comes in, so you need higher throughput, the edge computing, which we have been discussing for quite some time. It also depends on how much processing capacity the Vision Pro itself would have. Depending on that, you may need to enable edge computing. So such aspects of 5G would get rolled out with a new device. Most likely, hopefully, Apple would take that lead. So the discussions are around what should come in 5G headset, because you have slightly more space because you're wearing it and it's in home. So they are trying to say make a 2T2R type radio in that Vision Pro. So starting from there, hopefully it starts what's called the three-dimensional, which Professor Sridhar was also mentioning. It would start from there and things are evolving from there. So whatever Bhatia sir also mentioned, whether it's massive communication and all that. So one issue which all of us are like underwhelmed by 5G is, it was really sad when the whole standardization happened. Release 15 was actually a Verizon release. Okay? It was never meant for the larger crowd. And it was very focused on EMBB. So none of the other two features, the MMTC or the URLLC, really evolved in the release 15. EMBB got evolved, so you could see all your data rates going up. So effectively, it became a EMBB test network. So you are running speed test, shutting it down, and then going back to 4G. So that became the use case. But after release 15, the 16 again improved on MMTC, and now we have what is called the red cap. So that is the original 5G MMTC technology which came in. Otherwise, it was using NB-IoT, which was actually a 4G technology, which got, because of the timeline pressure to get the standard out, we had to use MMTC based on NB-IoT. Now it is red cap. URLLC is still evolving. So the release 18 has done something on how to improve latency, especially on the mini slot and all that stuff. Even now it's under development, what is called the SBFD and all that. So it takes time, and sometimes there are commercial pressure, like from an industry point of view, we have to sell every quarter, otherwise our revenue doesn't go up. So we will tell you stories, but it takes time to evolve some of those technologies. So that's from an industry thing. In 6G, as we are taking a lead, as Sridhar also mentioned, we have a Bharat 6G vision, which came much earlier. Last time when we were doing the 5G standardization, we were trying to get the LMLC in. we were way behind. TSDSA was not formed around this time. It was like 10 years back. TSDSA was just formed, and none of us were new. Everyone of us actually had to learn on the job because we didn't know how it works. Only Bhatia sir were helping us that time as well. So that's how you start in the standard. But this time we have taken a much earlier lead. We were able to add one complete new usage scenario, which is actually ubiquitous connectivity, which is part of Bharat 6G vision. So unlike, one good thing about India is like we have some scenarios which are completely unique in the sense 60% of our population is in rural area. None of the developed countries has that. So the rural area for them is train passing by. So their scenario for usage scenario in what is called the test environment or what they is actually a train, high-speed train passing through a rural area, which doesn't work for us. So this is something which this time, because we were on time, we got added as ubiquitous connectivity. And India being such a large geography, and we have been working now with the 4G deployment, as even in 4G, we are just deploying the 4G, and the amount of consumption is quite huge in the sense 1,000 sites we just got deployed, and it's consuming some 26 terabyte. Just so even 4G, there is a consumption, there is a lot of things, but you can't reach all the places. So other things which is not covered was you need sensing, which is coming in, ubiquitous connectivity, which is the second arm of it, and the third thing is related to AI getting integrated into communication. So it's not very clear whether AI is an application and communication is enabling it, or whether it will be AI native. The other thing which was also mentioned is like voice has become a real calamity in the sense you don't get real voice call. We have to use WhatsApp. There was even a discussion in 6G to make it native voice. Okay, there was T-Mobile asking for making it a native voice. Go back to the old 2G days and make proper phone call. So that's happening. And then there are more capabilities getting added, which are called the KPIs. 6 new capabilities got added. One of them is from India, which is the coverage, interoperability, and sustainability. These are 3 things which India contributed to it. And so industry is also participating in all of this and then ensuring that it moves ahead and get into the next stage. So this is at a research stage. Hopefully the deployments, including RIS, hopefully happens first time in India is what we are all thinking of. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Jishnu. And, so following up on what Mr. Bhatia and Jishnu said, I'm going to now ask both Ekant and Amrita, so given this context, how is academia thinking about 6G? So maybe Amrita, you can begin. And
Thank you, Dr. Milind. Thank you, Professor Sridhar, for the invitation and to be a part of such an esteemed panel. So, we have heard the standard aspect and we have heard the industry aspect. Academicians, the way I see them, are more like philosophers. So we like to go ahead and imagine things, which the feasibility part, of course, we do take cognizance of the fact that we are quite dreamy in that bit. But yeah, we do like to dream. So I'll just talk about how I visualize 6G to be way different from 5G. And I would just like to pick up or borrow a particular line which stuck to me from the Bharat 6G vision document, which was connectivity for high quality living experience of the world. So till now, I don't see telecom a significant part of enriching or enhancing our living experience. We do use it as a tool for various aspects, but I don't personally feel that the living experience aspect is taken care of. So perhaps with applications fueled by AR, XR, and VR, we are going to have immersive experiences in education, in entertainment, in retail, which is going to be going to take our experience to an altogether different level. Apart from that, the 2 other things which stand out in 6G, as Jishnu sir rightly pointed out, was ubiquitous connectivity, which is also one of the long-term sustainable development goals of United Nations. And that is more so relevant in a country like India, wherein majority of our population is in rural areas, and they should be able, service providers should be able to cater e-services to them to enhance or improve their quality and opportunities of human life. along with ubiquitous connectivity and intelligence, which is being talked about, sustainability has also taken quite a bit of limelight as far as 6G is concerned, because we just don't want things at the cost of perhaps hampering the environment or having high power transmission. So we are also looking at uh, 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 technologies which will be helping us achieve all these experiences, but with some kind of a conscience bearing in terms of sustainability, low energy, low cost. And that's how I would visualize 6G to be a game changer when it comes to being able to provide such kind of disruptive quality experiences to the end consumer. So that is my academic take on 6G, if I may so
Thank
say.
you. Thank you for that very philosophical view. Ekant, you also want to?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll add on. Like, first of all, thank you, Dr. Sridhar and Dr. Mirin, for inviting. And I'll add on to all the previous speaker what they were telling. So my view is like I was just attending few meetings from last few days, and got to know like 4G is like there is a government has some saturation like 4G saturation scheme, right? I got to know that almost 2,500 of villages in Uttarakhand is still not connected to internet. So, and we are talking about 6G. And very rightly said that ubiquitous connectivity is the one actually, as in India, like we should be happy that it is a part of IMT 2030 requirement. Otherwise, like if I'm saying 4G still is not saturated, 2,500 in a state like Uttarakhand is still not connected, which is a small state. We don't know what the rest of the part of the India. Another thing is like, and that's why like before 5G, it was all about like what Mr. Bhatia also said, it was all about cellular. 5G, when it came, it talked about more than cellular. Cellular, it is fine. We were already able to stream high-speed videos and all those things with 4G also. 5G was more than that. But what we have seen it, like an academia point of view also, when I talk to different industries, what they say is FR1 is like what Mr. Jisnu also said, FR1, but some 6 gigahertz that we tell is, that is okay. It is commercialized, we have phones, we are touch upon. But FR2 range, which is like the mmWave band, still not touched. And with 6G, we are talking about the frequency spectrum of the order of like 100 gigahertz also. As far as IMT 2030 document, it says that we will be covering frequency range of almost sub 1 gigahertz to hundreds and gigahertz and above. And when, as an academia, when I see that when we are talking about sub 6 gigahertz or some 1 gigahertz, okay, the kind of physical interface is fine. But when we talk about mmWave band or when we talk about terahertz or sub terahertz, which is 100 gigahertz band, so how exactly the actual communication will happen will always be a major concern, because for 5G also we don't see any application field, right? So in 6G, when we talk about, many people are talking about sub terahertz, how exactly it will be feasible? Those kind of things are still, as an academician, I always think like whether that is a feasible thing, because with 5G we have not been able to see that light. FR2 in India, at least I don't see any application. And then the use case application, very rightly said that new use case would come with 5G that was supposed to happen, but in India, still outside India, to the many application people are talking about, India Industry 4.0 or defense, still that 5G use case is still not there. And now we are talking about 6G use cases. So for me, it's like still daydreaming for now, at least if I say today, because it's still 10 years, I would say, because 5G use cases will take time, at least 3 to 4 years to come. And 6G use cases is another 5 years at least. Because we are thinking about like 2030 is the rollout for 6G as far as ITU document, IMT 2030 document. And then when we talk about academia, I will just take 1 minute more. And when we see any new generation of technology, we are very happy. Like, okay, new generation comes, technology, then we get ample amount of opportunity to publish papers and release any product if possible through some startups. But still, when we see here, one thing is physical layer development, right? That spectrum issues will happen. So physical layer development is the major change that will happen. When we go from FR1 to FR2 also, physical layer requirement channel model changes a lot. So only when we are going to sub terahertz, it will change further. The channel modeling and all those things will completely change. So there is too much of challenge there, no doubt. But there is also, when challenge comes, there is also an opportunity that is available for us. So in that way, we will see it as a positive way only. Yeah, thank you.
So thanks, Ekant. Just following up on that, perhaps you would want to take a couple of minutes to talk about what is the, what are the technology areas that your lab is focusing on?
Yeah.
As you move from your focus from 5G to 6G?
Yeah, sure. So when we have moved from like last 2 to 3 years, like as soon as the 5G was started to roll out, our team started working on 6G areas. One of the area was integrated communication and sensing, which is actually by IMT 2030 document, they've already listed at integrated sensing and communication is one of the focus areas. Because earlier there was a separate radar channel and separate communication channel. Now what they're saying is they can use the same channel for target detection as well as communicating with the users. So this is one of the areas which has I would say nice vision, like next 5 to 6 years, it may go into release 20 or release 21. We don't know. Then there's another area which is IRS, intelligent reflecting surface, which is pretty like known right now. And still there's no product available yet. People have been doing research on this. And RF people have been working on something called meta surface for I think almost 5 to 6 years or before also. But the major problem with intelligent reflecting surface is that how exactly to control that IRIS. People are designing IRIS, but controlling the IRIS so that it sweeps the entire range of the coverage. Let's say, for example, if we talk about 180-degree also, because there are multiple variants of RIS, like RIS is 180-degree, then something called simultaneously transmit and receive star RIS, which covers 360 degrees. So that is one nice area to, like, as an academician to explore. RIS is one area I said, integrated communication sensing that we are working on. There's another one which is like based on a very different concept altogether. Cell-free network, we say. Cell-free massive MIMO, when we say, like, for example, we have till 5G, we have a cellular architecture, right? Where we say there's a cell, there's a base station. Each cell will have only one base station. And all the users in that base station, all in the users in that cell will be served by that one base station only, right? But the problem with this is, like, whenever the user is in the cell edge, it will always have very low, there's a high possibility that it will suffer with the low SNR because of the huge interference. And it has been shown that the interference, because of this huge interference, sometimes call drop and all of the user experience hampers a lot. Even with massive MIMO kind of concept where number of antennas is taken to be 32 or 64 at the base station. But now with cell-free kind of architecture, which researchers has been actively researching, is they're saying there's no cell boundary. They're opening the cell boundary, and they're saying that every user, wherever located, they can be served by all the nearby APs or access point they're calling. So this is another domain of research that is happening. I don't know whether industry has picked up this or not, or whether they feel that it can go into standard. But this, you can say, it is a kind of extension of multi-TRP aspect that is already there in standard. These are the three main domains that we have been focusing for 6G. Another one domain is like, till 5G, we have been talking about OFDM, right? Like 4G and 5G both used OFDM as a multi-carrier technology. Now with 6G, there's because of the high mobility, because we're talking about with IMT 2030 reference only I'm taking, they've been talking about the speed of the order of 500 to 1000 kilometers per hour. With that kind of speed, the offset and mobility issues may come, Doppler effect will come. And OFDM may or may not be like capable of handling those things. I mean, so that is still a point of discussion, but that's why there are some other technologies that have come, some which is like OTFS, orthogonal time frequency space. So one set of researchers are there, like which are focusing their research a lot on OTFS and showing that, okay, it has better performance when compared to OFDM in case when the mobility is high, because it was actually in a completely different domain, Doppler domain. So these are few things which is like mainly happening. At least my area is on the physical level, so I can comment on. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Ekant. So I'll just take that same question to you, Amrita. Then, what is your lab focusing on when you look at 6G?
So, I was about thinking that do I have something else apart from what Ekant has added? Because our areas are very similar. So we have also we started with, looking at how beamforming happens in millimeter wave systems. Now, the predominant reason is when we move to higher frequency ranges, as Ekant rightly pointed out, the channel characteristics are going to significantly change. And that essentially fuel or drive redesign of the beamformers and the combiners, which are the basics required to be able to transmit and receive signal successfully. So we initially worked towards that. We've also been looking at some kind of terahertz communication, again, wherein the channel aspects are very, very different from how we model channels for even millimeter wave frequencies. Integrated sensing and communication has, in fact, drawn quite a bit of attention, at least in academia. The reason being that we can use the existing infrastructure, the cellular infrastructure, same time frequency resources to be able to perform two jobs. One is to do the intended communication, and the second is to be able to localize a target. So that becomes very handy when we talk about applications such as autonomous driving, wherein we need to be able to localize the position of vehicles, targets, etc., and at the same time be able to transmit signals in an uninterrupted manner, the ongoing, the current process. So we have been looking at that. Of course, there are a lot of challenges with all of these technologies. When we talk about ISAC, the first and the most fundamental challenge which can come to my mind is the interference, because now you are going to have the same setup, the transceiver setup, which has two sets of signals. One is the sensing signal, the other one is the communication signal. So how do we actually engage with them differently? How do we differentiate them? IRS, I would rather say, is slightly has taken as slightly the age of information wise has slightly taken as a bit old. As Ekant rightly pointed out, we are still yet to have a product or a working prototype in the market, but a lot of research in terms of how IRS can be used in conjunction to existing communication frameworks, existing cellular frameworks, for different kinds of applications, for extending range, for preventing eavesdropper, that is providing some kind of a physical layer security. So we have been trying to look at IRS in conjunction with different existing applications and seeing if they actually walk the talk and they are able to do something additional. Because the way we see it, as I said with ISAC also, that we want to be able to scale with the existing infrastructure. We should be able to equip them with something else and build on it rather than start something from scratch. So that is another, IRS is another area which we are actively working on. And I do want to dip my toes into something very interesting, which is semantic communication. That is again, which the 6G document also talks about, wherein the idea here is that we do not see communication in a discrete manner in the form of bits. It should be more like a flow of information, wherein the receiver should be capable or equipped enough to make some kind of a prediction in terms of what are the next signals or bits which are going to arrive. So these are 3 or 4 areas which we are looking at, and that's all about it from my side.
So Jishnu, coming to you, we heard where academia is focusing their research attention. From Tejas's perspective, where do you think is the bang for the buck in terms of technology development in 6G?
Yeah, so first to answer what Ekant was saying, right? See, the deployment as such, like people have been very comfortable deploying 4G. 5G is still a research area, though it has got deployed. The beamforming, which was mentioned earlier, is something which is still under sort a lot of studies. Basically, there are the QCL recently got defined and all that stuff. So if you say there are 3 levels at which it happens in industry, there is research. So research is in 6G. Development is happening in 5G. People are sort of making it more efficient, trying to use it in multiple different use cases and all that stuff. And actual deployment in large scale has happened in 4G, and it's very stable, and people are like more or less optimizing that. Right? So that is where the evolution would give you money, in the sense you have to continue with that. Specific use cases in 5G also is like the first sort of deployments are being tried out, at least from Tejas' point of view, because we are now part of Tata Group. We have access to multiple vertical companies. There, they are trying to use 5G for specific verticals, especially in large campuses, so like mining, etc., where it's not commercially viable to put a tower. So none of the operator would do it. So then how do you communicate? And these are all mining, at least location is completely dynamic in the sense, once you dig up, you can't put a tower in a static way and move on. So such level of specific use cases for operators, or whether it's like uh, verticals which are very focused on that, that is happening for 5G. So it's about optimizing it for different use cases that is happening in 5G. 6G, as was mentioned, I think all the research, RIS looks very promising. And it also means within RIS, I see there is also material level technology which needs to come in, because at lower frequency, dielectric makes sense. At higher frequencies, especially terahertz, graphene makes sense. But independent of it, that RIS is the only way to allow you some way of line of sight. That's you get reflected and then get it into the home, because there's no way, because this is the physics. You can't go beyond certain distance. The only way to take signal to your home is through RIS or something equivalent. The other thing is satellite. Satellites are slowly coming as a big player. So we also have done initial thing, not standard based, where we are connecting all the fishing boats, which are initially we started with Tamil Nadu. They're using ISRO satellite, which can communicate basic signal, SOS type signal, and a small voice signal, which directly connects to a Hyderabad sender based. It's a sender which sends Coast Guard vehicle to take out the fisherman if something unfortunate happens to him. So that's getting now deployed pan India. So that's where the recently, I think you might have seen an announcement from Tejas, whereby our sister company Sankhya Labs had done that chipset, which would allow all the fishermen now to be connected. So these are areas where even terrestrial network doesn't reach. So there is an NTN where there is a lot of activity happening. And we are proud to say that we are much better than what Apple did on their phone with an SOS. But we are not using standard based. We use our own waveform in that. So NTN looks promising, RIS look promising, AML looks a really promising thing on the air interface part of it. So specific issue, which is like, how do you load balance across two base station? Other thing is, how do I need so much of CSI information, channel state information to be propagated? This is something becoming a real big problem, especially with beamforming, because you have to, for each of the RF chain, you would have to send the signal. And do you really need to send all of this? And even if you send, because all of this, especially in higher frequency band, are all TDD. So your feedback takes time to go back. And then, yeah, and especially with larger frequency, the signal changes quite a bit, in the sense channel state information is quite stale in that period of time within. So how do you get that done? Can I compress it? That is one thing which is happening. The real improvement which is seen with AML has been on positioning. There is some 35% improvement on positioning. And that is possible because, see, none of this really happens either on the device or the network. So there is a large data center where you can pump in the LMF, is run on a central server. You can pull in the information and send it to the LMF, and then all the processing is happening, and you can see significant improvement. So it can be either in edge or in a cloud. And that is a real use case, if you want to say, because especially in a room like this, you can't get a GPS. So how do I triangulate myself? And the other advantage with 5G coming in is you can also get an angle of arrival, because you can get a three-dimensional view of where you are, unlike GPS, which was a two-dimensional thing. So, so that is helping. So that's some work where there is some value which a network can bring in, which say GPS cannot bring in, or some stuff. And this is the real value. If you see, any application really needs your location. Okay, so if you can get it better and better, that's the value, and that's evolving towards sensing. In the sense, I not only want to get information about you, which is you are a connected device, then I can know your information. What about the chairs or the benches here, right? So I want information about even this, triangulated to centimeter level accuracy, right? In which case, how do I do it? That's where 6G is coming in. So positioning started off in 5G. It's getting improved in 6G. Sensing is completely new in 6G. And that basically we are doing the initial channel estimation and all that stuff. How do you do it? Higher frequency, what is the best use? We are using radar frequency. Use it as radar, right? So that's why sensing is coming in at that frequency. The initial part is 6 to 24 gigahertz. That's where industry sees a lot of things. Terahertz is mostly from a research perspective. We also don't know how eventually it's going to be used. But from my personal perspective, it may be used for interconnects between two chipsets, which is a right place where initially it can come in. The other thing about waveform, the other thing is like if satellites are moving at a very high fast, we are thinking of HIPs or HABs, which are planes moving at say 800 kilometer per hour, satellites at thousands of kilometer per hour. I can now do, unlike the present terrestrial communication, which is all based on Fourier transform, I can now do a delay Doppler thing, and then maybe I can send more, get a better spectral efficiency. That's exactly the OTF which Ekant was mentioning, and here also we had some discussion on that. So OTFS looks interesting. The other interesting thing is that as soon as you go terahertz, at least I am also, Tejas has been in optical for quite long, your waveform looks more optical rather than RF. Okay, it's very pointed. You have to anyhow use beamforming. And if you see the modulation scheme, it's called OAM, orbital angular momentum. It looks interesting, and that's a research project at IIT Madras, which is funded by Government of India. It's very similar that one which we use in DWDM, which are different modes. We are circulating it and taking it out. So that looks interesting on from the terahertz perspective. But that is only for research. I don't think there is a huge commercial thing right now for us. Maybe chip industry may have a use for that. The last part is about the issue of PAPR, right, which has been, I think, the real research topic, right, continues to be getting worse and worse with higher and higher frequencies, right? So this also helped both OTFS and OAM seems to be much better than OFDM. Getting this into standard is a different problem. Okay, I don't know how do you do it. So at least the first research has to show that there is significant improvement on that. And then that can over time get into this. The other part, which I think most of the discussion was around wireless, is on the optical side. And I think there was a slide on Sridhar thing on backhaul. This is something which we also see India is taking a different way of backhauling. We are doing GPON based backhauling. So all of the 5G backhaul, which is happening today, at least in Airtel, I know it's all GPON based. This is quite different from earlier case where you have to put a router at each of these places, right? So that is slightly different. And then you need router deeper into the network. In addition to that, all said and done, as even if I know that right of way is being part of the telecommunication bill, you can't take fiber everywhere. At some point, we would have to stop. Beyond that, there is something technology called integrated access and backhaul, which I think is where the real millimeter wave can be used up, or even the 6G, initial 6 gigahertz deployment, right? So you can use the same frequency both for backhaul and access. Access is a lesser use case, but hopefully access is for fixed wireless access type access, not the mobile thing. Mobile most likely would be on FR1. The FR2, FR3 bands which are being discussed is mostly a replacement for the existing microwave, which are all proprietary. Right now, if you see all the microwaves which you have are all proprietary, and you need a separate set of infrastructure itself to do it. Most likely by integrated access and backhaul, we would not need it. So you take fiber to some point, and beyond that, you do integrated access and backhaul. And after that, once you have the access, you do RIS to reach homes with either fixed wireless access or for the mobile users. So that's where I think sort of commercially we see stuff coming in around it. And hopefully we are also focusing on how the terahertz receivers comes up, transceiver comes up. That would also, it's too early to comment on that commercially, at least for any of us in industry.
So what I was saying is, what was interesting to me is that there was a significant intersection between where Vishnu sees, a possible mileage commercially and where academia is focusing research. So that's a very sort of comforting thing where it's clear now that academia and industry are well aligned. In the interest of time, let me jump to the second half of the conversation that I wanted to have, which is, so given that all of this research is going on, and I'm going to bring you here, Mr. Bhatia, standardization, we are now very clear as a community that standardization is a very important piece of this whole puzzle. And standardization is a little bit of a funny beast, right? It requires global collaboration. So I think like I was just saying that standardization requires both global collaboration, but also then global competition. It also requires some amount of national, nation level coordination between Indian players who are also potentially competitors with each other, right? So how do we see this entire collaboration competition scenario playing out? And how should we as a community begin to address some of these issues? I think, Mr. Bhatia, you've been at the forefront of this. So it'll be great to hear your perspective. And then, Jishnu, I'd like you also to chip in because you have also been a part of some of these conversations. Mr. Bhatia?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, I think you have really hit the nail on the head. And Jishnu knows, and we have all worked so difficult circumstances during the 5G and then during the 6G standard process. Standards on a global scale is really a very close club. It is not something that one can easily penetrate into. Being a part of a uh, first of all, you have to be part of that club itself, and it was not that easy for India to get into that because everybody thought, no, this is big boys club, and India doesn't. And I think very successfully, IIT Madras and Jishnu's team and everybody else worked together, and I did play some role in. And finally, we did get into the big boys club of what we call here is working party 5D here, and then 3GPP, where these standards get developed. But I think now we are kind of recognized as a part of the club, but I think we still have miles and miles to go. As I see in these standards, it requires huge investment. It is not low cost. I see in these meetings, and right now I'm here in this meeting, where we are outdone almost like 10 to 1. If China sends 100 people to the last WRC conference we had in Dubai, we could send only about maybe 15, 20. And out of that also, many of them were not really representing the Indian standards in tests. And to attend these meetings itself is a very, very costly affair. It is not low cost. So to be a part of this global standards, first of all, government has to invest in a big way, and I think that is still some time away. Government does fund research, and we have people attending this meeting funded by the government. But we have still not reached the level of participation that is done by, for example, US or China or the European vendors who really play this game very well. So standards will continue to play a big role. India has to up its game in terms of participation standards, because without standards, it will almost be impossible to get into that. But things are not as bad. Things have improved. I think Jishnu will tell you the story of how we were able to get ubiquitous connectivity into the 6G standards despite so much difficulty and so much opposition from around the world. Now we have this ubiquitous connectivity, which can best be done by integrating the satellite and airborne communication into the terrestrial communication. NTN, for one example, is that. It is almost still impossible to penetrate the standards groups of how do you combine the satellites and the terrestrial. The way the hierarchy works here in the standards development groups is the satellites are kept separately and terrestrial kept separately. And if we have to combine it together, we in this meeting you brought some proposal. In fact, I was just chairing a group on air to ground communication. How do you use the normal 4G or 5G to connect with the drones? China brought the proposal. We have still nobody in India working on that. And that itself is huge opening up market. Typically people use Wi-Fi, but if you have to use 5G, what are the issues involved and how do you And that standard, we are just started work on that. Similarly, on the MSS, satellite, low Earth orbit satellites, how they can become like a IMT base station. You just put a base station on a satellite and let it communicate directly to the masses onto a device. It's a huge potential market for people who are unconnected, where somebody mentioned Uttarkashi. There are many areas who cannot connect at all except through the satellite, and that there are no standards. 3GPP started working on that little bit, but in the ITU is still not recognized because the satellite teams who does standardization for satellites will not talk to the teams who work on the terrestrial communications. So there are a number of issues, but I think things are moving. It is a slow process, but I think the main thing that is needed is the investment, and I think government has to come up in a big way, just like China does, to be a part of that big club. Thank you.
Thanks from IIIT Bangalore.
Yeah, just to add, so why do you need standards, especially from an academia point of view? See, you can, as Madam told, you can start philosophizing what you want. The second step is go for patenting, okay? Because eventually, if you want that technology to get deployed, you need to patent. And once you patent, ensure that that becomes a standard essential patent. So this is the step for if you are really not just philosophizing and you want that to actually get into the field, you need to go through these 3 steps in the sense, form an idea, get it patented if that idea is quite good, and then take it to a standard essential patent. As you told, the competition and cooperation is both needed in a standard thing. Luckily in India, we don't have that much of competition issues right now because there are very few people working on it, which is also our strength. By the way, why we were able to get ubiquitous connectivity and coverage, which is something even US government wanted. Yeah, and we could get it through from Indian point of view, was because there was hardly any competition. We were all working together. Professor Kiran from IIT Hyderabad was part of it. I think IIT Madras is part of it. IISc is part of it. And government is funding quite a bit. Okay, last time there was a 250 crore funding for 5G testbed. This time again, similar or even larger thing is done. Things are getting cleaned up. There is now something called in the Telecommunication Act, something called Bharat Niti, which is actually now formalizing funding for research. So things are coming in place. There is something called Bharat 6G Alliance. So that is specifically for Indian companies and Indian academia to collaborate, where we can't work with MNCs. We are basically working outside TSDSI. Yeah, so we basically get things done, collaborate there where we don't want any MNC interference. You can work through TSDSI where there is also an MNC opinion which you can get. And then finally, you have to get it standardized as mentioned in 3GPP to get the solution. Requirement stage is what is happening right now in 6G. So that's where, as India, we could go. So all of whoever are interested in putting the KPI numbers, that's the next big thing which is happening now. The next meeting would be on that, what is called the minimum technical performance report. So that values, which are around 15 capabilities, all those values are up for research and the numbers has to be suggested. We had sent one input this time from Indian side, mostly based on research from Kiran, based on something similar to OTFS, but slightly improved version of OTFS. So there are numbers which looks very promising, which are much better than 5G numbers. So that has been proposed and hopefully it will evolve over next few meetings. And I think all of academia, etc., also should contribute now. There may be better ways to do it. And once that numbers are there, the minimum TPR numbers are there, this is like a question paper. So the question paper is set by ITU. The answers can be given by multiple guys. Last time, only 2 guys gave. One was 3GPP, another was from India as part of TSDSI. Similarly, we will be following a process this time as well. The requirements will go through government because it's much easier to do things through government. So there is something called NSG 5 where you have to contribute and get it through the government. So it goes as a government contribution. So none of the names of anyone who has contributed would be there. But it's good. Actually, it goes as India, and usually in ITU, only 2 countries need to support and things usually go through. And India, for all good reasons, we never picked up too much geopolitical rivals anywhere. And luckily, Pakistan doesn't attend it. So So more or less, whatever we propose, it gets through. Even US, last time when we were doing ubiquitous connectivity, Modi was about to reach US. So luckily we got it through during that time because that meeting was pending. They came to us. Okay, it was quite a change where US came to us and started negotiating what is the text. So we had to go slightly lower on text, but they kept the main ubiquitous connectivity and coverage. So Bharat 6G Alliance is other thing. TTDF is funding it. I think it's a common website where people can go register your project. And there is a approval mechanism and all that. I don't know whether IIIT-B is also part of it. So AOC got, that was an advanced optical communication. So in optical communication, I see SDM coming in, which is called space division multiplexing. Exactly same thing which we have been in wireless, whether it's like space-time communication, whatever, coding thing is also coming in optical, but there I can control the channel. That's the only good thing there. So that you are, at least in optical, we have reached what is called a 100 terabit per system limit. So on a fiber, the maximum capacity which we can do is 100 terabyte per link. That is reached. Okay, that's a Shannon limit. Okay, if you have to cross that, you have to do something. So things which are still some time away in radio, because I can increase the wavelength, I have touched that in optical because I can't have certain frequencies. You can only do 1550 nanometer and the 1310 nanometers. So there, some effort is going on to the initial research on putting what is called this SDM fiber is undergoing in IIT Madras. Maybe hopefully IIIT-B can also join if there are optical people interested in that part of it. Then there is 50 gig PON and higher PON, which is point to multi-point type English. So these are something where a lot of collaboration is happening. And hopefully Bharat 6G Alliance, which is formed, would do a lot more of those interaction where they're trying to bring all academy and industry in one place. It's purely Indian thing within that Bharat 6G Alliance, and hopefully it should be successful this time. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Jishnu. So, very, very interesting conversation. We've also sort of laid, I think, the groundwork for the next panel. So maybe a good time to then open up the floor for questions. If there are any questions.
Yeah, running out of time, but Dr. Milind, there is one question online. How much emphasis is being given to security aspects of 6G and technology R&D and standard making discourse?
Yeah, so I think we didn't cover much because we are all from physical layer and all, not much security expert. But I think if you see what is called the wheel diagram, is that hexagon thing, it's called the wheel diagram. In that one, the wheel actually consists of trustworthiness, and trust and security is becoming the cornerstone. Right now, there is no real way, so we usually keep out countries, equipment, if those countries are like not trustworthy. So hopefully, technology-wise, maybe quantum security, etc., can help bridge that divide. But right now, more like an open issue. The trust is building between countries, and those countries are.
I have one final question. So, we spoke quite a bit, and I think Ekant referred to it a little bit. But any comments on spectrum?
Okay, spectrum, I think 6 to 24 is being discussed. I think WRC 23, as Sridhar was also mentioning, there was some discussion around it. So that looks, there is at least in India also some band part of it which could be used in thing. Terahertz is more research, so it's okay. So I think it will be experimental spectrum can be obtained in all that because no one is using it, as far as I know. So you can get that experimental spectrum in 95 to 300 gigahertz. And I think it's also mostly about the TRX, whatever that technology would be availability, and based on that, that spectrum would be made available. But 6, there are satellites being using it and all that stuff. So that would be as contentious as it would have been earlier. And unlicensed, licensed issue is also there. Generally, I don't know. It's my personal take. Is like the unlicensed part of it. The problem here is like it's mostly good for indoor thing. The outdoor, it really doesn't work because over time we have seen. I think in Bangalore itself there was a Ticona network. It started off really well. They were able to give very high capacity, but over time when people started using that same frequency for their access network, it got delayed. So unlicensed is okay in an indoor environment, but not very good outdoor. So And this being higher frequencies, I hope this will all be licensed, but it's a, yeah, I don't know exactly what it.
We are talking 5G, 6G, 4G, all these things. But what is the focus or efforts being put to, on the handsets? The adoption of 4G, 5G has been hindered. Even yesterday, if you had seen, Jio has sent a letter to the Minister of IT saying that, ban all the 2G, 3G phones so that people adopt 4G. But the cost of this smartphone, so-called smartphone, which has got very unsmart features with respect to security, is a huge problem. If at all, any efforts are being put for the handsets. I was in a pilgrimage till yesterday in Swami Malai. I could see it's a huge resort, well-funded, almost all the workers carried a feature phone to talk, not a smartphone. So adopting upward technology like a 4G or a 5G or upcoming 6G, there has to be a parallel effort put to reduce the cost of handsets. Is anything happening on that front? Otherwise, all these technologies will remain with only the elite. Today, 5G is being, like she said, no, it has not impacted anything because I'm already in a luxurious world and, I have at home 100 Mbps broadband connection and, I don't see any difference of or need to go for 5G handset. I have 2 handsets, both of them are only 4G. I have not moved to 5G, though Apple keeps on telling me, sir, come and update to 5G, come and update to 5G. But why will I invest on a 5G phone when my phones are working fine? So this is one thing which I've been always perplexed. I have written to Mr. Ashwini Vaishnav also saying that, no, focus. Don't need all the jing bang of smartphones, but basic radio communication on the handsets, move it to the higher technologies. Can we do something? So I'm just an ignorant person.
So basically the problem here is it's mostly the chipset guys who drives the whole thing, right? So you have Qualcomm, MediaTek, and now I think even Apple, Samsung. So all the big guys basically make the chipset. Somehow that never really like tried, say there is no motivation to reduce the price for them because it's right now the yeah, so that is something which I don't see even sadly. I was hoping at least when we start 6G, there may be a lot more of chipset companies.
Yes, sir. I think overall, and maybe we'll take this topic offline. What I don't one thing where we are not still seeing too much synergization. The government is pushing semiconductor mission on one end. It is pushing 6G, but there doesn't seem to be yet too much coordination between the two. And that may be something that may be worth looking at going forward.
Yeah, it's quite, see, the problem here is, though we have, I think most of the chip design happens out of India, there are multiple stages for that. So the chip design part, India is good, but then you have to make the wafer, fabricating the wafer and all that stuff is a real. So hopefully, yeah, I hope I see a lot of companies. Yeah.
So, sir, so since in the interest of time, we'll take this offline, but thank you very much. Mr. Bhatia has left, but Jishnu, Amrita and Ekant, thank you for a very lively discussion and at least I learned a lot. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Ekant, Jishnu and Professor Amrita, Dr. Milan. Thank you very much for contributing to this session. It's really very insightful. So we will go into the next session. So I think Ujjwal is ready from CUTS. So Ujjwal is going to sort of share the research findings with respect to regulation and ethics in 6G. briefly. We are running out of time, Ujjwal, about 10 minutes. And then after that, we'll start the panel discussion because the panelists are already there. Over to you, Ujjwal.
Thank you, Dr. Sridhar. You have already described the project. So I'll just flag some of the things. I hope my screen is visible.
You can just do the presentation mode and then you can start.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Professor Sridhar. I'll just flag out some of the issues that has come out as far as regulations are concerned, regulations and ethics, and which can feed into the panel discussions that follows. In ethical framework, we actually looked into this study of six elements. One was privacy and data protection, then cyber security, consumer protection and competition, and then consumer trust or trusted ecosystem, and then inclusivity and sustainability aspect. Again, just flagging, it has been reiterated in last session. The vision of 6G, the first three are continuation of 5G vision. The ubiquitous connectivity, integrated AI communication, and integrated sensing and communication are the three new which is added to the 6G ecosystem. That makes it a bit complex from the regulation perspective. At how we will regulate such integrated technological framework. So we are talking about very high machine-to-machine communication, Internet of Everything or Internet of Nano thing, as Professor Sridhar said. There will be high use of AI in the network.
You have to talk a little bit louder.
Yeah, am I audible now?
Yeah.
So there will be high use of AI in the telecom networks. There will be massive use of cloud services and combination of terrestrial and non-terrestrial infrastructure. So altogether, telecom, cyber, and digital technologies are coming integrated or fused together to kind of a whole. So it would be from the regulatory perspective, it might be very difficult to kind of segregate, because you have regulators for each and every element. Other ministries or other regulators are there. So this may be pose a very complex situation in future. Secured 6G, the cyber security aspect, we looked into, we understand now that the surface area will be so large that the cyber attacks will be more and more. And there are state and non-state actors which are active. So the thinking at the developed country level like US, Australia, New Zealand, Netherlands, UK, and EU are that the reliance on regulation and the consumer awareness should be less and more on the security by design or default. The technological aspect should be such that the security is assured. And some of the technologies that are coming out for this is like PPFL and post-quantum cryptography these are being talked about from the security perspective in the 6G ecosystem. As far as regulatory framework is concerned, Australia has just overhauled its cybersecurity regime, and India is also considering a new regime. The Digital India Act is on cards. We are also hearing about talks about new national cybersecurity policy. The old one is 2013, and it's high time that it happens now. So there is a need for kind of learning from Australia how they have, because their attack on the telecom network Optus and then the media bank has triggered public outrage, and the government has become serious. But our attack on the same time on AIMS infrastructure was not met with the same seriousness, is our understanding. So we also need some enhanced international cooperation and threat assessment at the national level. Singapore is a right example for that. And of course, accountability and transparency in the cybersecurity. Cyber audits need to be, kind of more and more for the network service provider. Privacy, I'm speaking, skipping this slide because new regime has come on data protection. We still have to see how it works. The rules are still in the making. So we'll take into that. Consumer protection, again, I'll skip because again, the consumer protection law is there. New telecom law also talks about some consumer protection issues. The data protection law is also there. So what here is that ensuring quality of service. So far, 4G, even in 5G, we are hearing that quality is not up to the mark. There are call drops and there are internet breaking at times. So we feel that the service providers would emphasize on the quality of service in future. And the profile of consumer protection need to also be slightly raised. We have almost forgot talking about the consumer protection aspect in policy discourse these days. Competition concerns, here I'll devote some time was we understand that in the debate around 6G ecosystem, this is missing, and then we want to get this on agenda of the national discourse and the international discourse as well. We see that the telecom sector is concentrated, digital platform markets are concentrated, cloud services market is very concentrated, and there is an increasing trend of vertical integration. So there are likely to be competition concerns arising out of these. And concentration per se may not be able to dealt by just competition enforcement. We may need a whole of government approach in this regard. Then there is an issue of we are hearing about the standard essential patent and the fair and reasonable and non-discriminatory licensing of that. So I think the rise of China in this technology, and they have well thought of strategy of SEP FRAT, the making of the phones and the network equipment. I think we also need to have some strategy, a national strategy of SAP FRAT issue. This is a competition issue as well. And I'm skipping the jurisdiction, so there was a high court judgment on that. On net neutrality, again, is a competition issue. And we see that debate in the network slicing debate in 5G. I think it's still unsettled whether network slicing will amount to a breach of net neutrality or not. Our understanding is that for the use cases, the network requirements should be use cases centric rather than firm centric. Then perhaps net neutrality will not be a kind of based. There was also talk about net neutrality on the OTT compensating telcos, OTT players saying that it will be breach of net neutrality, while telco saying that no, it will not be breach of net neutrality. There are competition issues vis-a-vis cloud services, which I'll talk. There are competition issues vis-a-vis the use of AI in network operation. Then we can think of pro-competition technologies, 6G technologies. Open RAN will be a pro-competitive technology because it will also help enhance interoperability between the equipments and the service providers. We should also understand that geopolitics can reduce choice and hence competition. We already seeing that some of the countries have either vocally or de facto banned some of the equipment manufacturers from our country. That reduces competition. So there should be a balance. There should be a kind of without undermining the cyber security and cyber threat, one should look into this. Then we also understand that the technical expertise shortages and access to capital can act as entry barriers that can reduce competition in the market. So coming to the cloud services, we because there will be massive use of cloud in the 6G, and all the players, market players, will be using clouds for their service providing. So there are three big cloud service providers, and there are a few others. And there has been increase in concentration. In fact, in 2015, the others, smaller players, used to have 50% of market share, but by 2022, that has reduced below 20. I think it's 18%. There has been market studies by the competition authorities or the sectoral regulators. We need to look into that. The 3-4 competition concerns that arise out of that, those market studies, are restrictive licensing agreements that tends to lock customers. Customers here are not the end consumers, but the service providers would be the customers. Then there are high ingress fee for kind of changing the cloud services. Then technical restrictions are there on interoperability, and the discount structuring are such that discourages the customers to change the cloud service providers. So there has been investigations going on in US, FTC, UK Competition and Market Authority, EU Competition Authority. There are investigations going on. Then there are AI-related competition issues, which will also come into, as the vision says, that AI in the network is one of the use in 6G. So we understand that there is a high concentration in AI foundational models. UK's Competition Authority has just released some of the initial reports, and CCI, the Competition Commission of India, is also going to study the AI-related competition concerns, AI market. There are issues like collusion. Machine to machine can collude to exclude the competitor or cheat the consumers, end consumers. There may be issues of abuse of dominance since it is highly concentrated. Mergers and acquisitions need to be kind of very strictly scrutinized so that no further consolidation happens in this market. Including vertical mergers need to be kind of looked into. Generally, there is a tendency to take the vertical mergers lightly. Only horizontal mergers are generally scrutinized, but I think vertical mergers will also be very important in this ecosystem. Then regulations are in the upcoming regulations, like AI regulation. How to regulate artificial intelligence so that it is pro-competition, less restrictive than what is required. Then the IPR regulations also need to be more pro-competitive in that, particularly in the sense of SAP FRAND. And there are pro-competition technological solutions as well, like open model, but those there is a trade-off between the security and safety aspect in those open models. So recommendations in the competition issues are like we need to have a whole of government approach, competition commission, so to loss of market studies, competition advocacy. The importance of sectoral regulators and nodal ministries, sectoral regulators like TRI or the data board or the cybersecurity regulators, and the nodal ministries like DOT and METI and DPIIT are important so that the market remains competitive. There is no kind of need for ex post enforcement. That is not happening. In fact, this is the one that is coming out from EU, that is coming out from US also, that you need to prehand think about a competitive market rather than kind of stitch in time saves nine kind of works. Engagement with intergovernmental organizations can also be very useful. India and Australia, here lies some of the kind of low-hanging fruits, like can work together for cyber skilling and ensuring capital, so that because both of them act as entry barriers for new players or the equipment makers everywhere, and that provides provides as a that act as an entry barrier. Then, of course, Open RAN is being talked about, interoperability is being talked about. That is good thing in that sense. So competition issues need to also be part of the 6G discourse. This has been missing. That is what I am arguing here. Then trusted 6G ecosystem, of course, consumer trust should be there, cyber data secure, and there need to be a cross-border flow of data. There need to be some sort of international understanding where India can lead. Then inclusive and sustainable 6G, we understand that the ubiquitous 6G is already in the vision, but we understand that there are problems in the standard making as satellite is standards vis-a-vis satellite as far as telecommunication is concerned. So both standard bodies or standard making ecosystem of satellite and ecosystem of telecom are not talking together, so that they need to talk together in that sense. Then there are these technological issues like device-to-device communication, multi-edge computing, and radio access technologies. Interoperability of these are key to inclusiveness. So that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ujjwal. So that's Ujjwal discussing about the regulatory and ethical issues from 6G. So we have now the second panel discussion. So we have with us 5 esteemed panelists. First is Ms. Payal Malik. She is a professor at IIIT. She has been the economic advisor and head of the economics division at the Competition Commission of India for over 10 years, from 2012 until 2023, where she played a key role in advising the Commission on the Economics and Competition Law across markets. So her areas of expertise are competition law and policy, digital markets, antitrust litigation, technology policy, economic regulations of networked industries. Thank you very much, Payal, for joining.
Thank you for having me, Sridhar. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. And our second panelist is Isha Suri from Center for Internet and Society. So Isha is a research lead at the Center for Internet and Society. Her areas of interest include telecom policy, competition law, internet governance, intellectual property rights, and privacy and data protection. She holds an LLB honors with a specialization in intellectual property law from IIT Kharagpur. She's also a degree in electrical engineering. So welcome, Isha, to the panel discussion.
Thank you for having me.
Ms. Amrita Chaudhary, Cyber Cafe Association of India. Amrita serves as the director of CCAOI, treasurer of Internet Society of India, Delhi chapter, and the APEC lead of SIG Women. She is also involved in conducting studies and research on issues relating to internet governance, capacity building among communities, conducting events and seminars, etc. She keeps the community updated on events, initiatives, policies, and opportunities. She releases a monthly newsletter, which is the only one in India and South Asia. Welcome, Amrita, to this panel discussion.
Thank you, Professor Sridhar.
Thank you. And we have Dr. Rohit Prasad, the professor at the Management Development Institute, Gurgaon. He is a very close friend of mine. So we have worked very closely for the last decade or so on various issues in telecom, including spectrum regulation. So he's an economist, and of course, he is the PhD thesis advisor, was a Nobel-winning economist. His expertise in game theory. He also works a lot on competition issues and regulation. So welcome, Dr. Rohit Prasad.
Thank you so much, Sridhar.
We also have Srimati Meenakshi Agarwal from the Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, Government of India. So definitely welcome, Ms. Meenakshi, and hopefully we'll get to hear from you about the government's vision on 6G. So thank you very much for joining this particular panel discussion on 6G regulations and ethical issues. So first, let me just ask each one of you panelists to say in about 2 to 3 words, 2 to 3 minutes, what you think are the important regulatory and ethical issues when we move towards 6G, which is going to happen probably around 2030, 7 years ahead. Your vision, please. Over to you, Payal.
Thank you, Sridhar. So, sorry, I must have missed the initial part of your question. There was some problem on this side. But I guess my contribution today would be very brief, but how this new technology could be harnessed for the welfare of the society, and how competition, regulation, interface with this technology could make it possible, and what are the levers and instruments, regulatory instruments, which could make this possible. And in fact, I think few pointers were given by the previous speaker, Ujjwal, who was speaking regarding the competition issues when it comes to 6G. So I would just briefly bring that out in my intervention. So means this is known to all of us, because the AI and competition issues are also going to have a bearing on the deployment and on the success of this technology. And so these will be the two issues. One will be the AI and competition issues, and the second would be the more basic issue, which I think Ujjwal had also raised. It is about sharing of infrastructure costs, because I know this is a very, very divided and a very, very polarized debate. But the first thing I took up once I demitted office from Competition Commission of India was to see what is academia talking about, and what is the best way to resolve this seemingly intractable problem. And what I found was it is not so much intractable as that it's polarized, and how big tech companies have sheltered by the net neutrality policies have flourished. They now have the power also. So they took the coverage or covering of net neutrality policies in debating that they need not pay for the infrastructure deployment. So if you're talking about infrastructure deployment, you're talking about 6G, who pays? That would be the question. Should the data hogging internet companies who use so much of data in access, and consumers access those now OTT platforms, over the top platforms, so to speak, should they be also contributing to the infrastructure costs? So it is important to understand, and I have, in the sense, I have taken a position, and therefore I will bring that position to the table rather than just saying that it is a debate. It is that the telecom service provider, let's understand it as mediating between two sides of the market, between the content provider and the final consumer. So upgrades to the network have to be paid for either by the consumers or by the content provider, or both. Nobody knows what the right pricing structure is going to be, but yes, the net neutrality evangelists, as well as the big tech companies, as I said, who have taken recourse to the again, a regulatory principle. And so we have to also see how regulation has to keep on updating itself, has to be dynamic given changing circumstances in the market, and hence market positions change, regulations also need to change, and cannot be written in stone. So hard net neutrality rules were written for a time when these telecom companies were the bottleneck, and the idea was that they should not be picking winners, and the app layer or the application layer should be allowed to develop. And this, in the absence of net neutrality, this would not happen. And so therefore, basically, payment of any kind by any of these internet companies to the telecom companies could result in a situation where the winners would be picked by these telecom network service providers who were providing these broadband networks. So the things have changed on the ground. And as I said, there is no presumption, or there should be no presumption, that the right structure is to recover all the costs of broadband networks from consumers alone, and allow the content providers zero-priced network access. if one accepts the need for large investments, and with 6G and 6G use case models developing, etc., there would be a requirement of investments to expand and upgrade capacity, and that the cost should be, I think, that is my opinion from reading the literature and also having worked on the ground at the competition authority and looking at these issues far more closely, is that we need rules on which the content providers should provide to the telecom service providers, or through some mechanism, I've not yet worked out the mechanism, but contribute to the network access. So in a paper by Bouvard and Julien, they talk about fair cost sharing and show that it can be efficient when this cost sharing is restricted to large and efficient content providers, which are and can monetize demand either through prices or through advertising or other means. And now we are 11 or 10 years into the internet company boom, and we are seeing how ad models have led to increased market capitalizations of these internet companies, and how they are these large companies which have monetized demand could be the contributors to the infrastructure. Agreed, contractual issues may arise when it comes to decide who pays and how much, and that's why regulation, it needs to be a regulated price. And we are seeing this already. The mirror image of this has already been seen in antitrust cases against the app stores by app developers. So look at the irony that when it comes to the usage of application stores, which are bundled with the operating systems of these big tech companies, of these large internet companies, they are asking for a contribution by the content layer, all right, which are the application which are running on the app stores, and as high as 30%, not only for a one-time payment, but for getting onto the platform, but for each and every transaction which takes place in certain very, very popular applications. Now, if you mirror image that in the telecom setup, then would it be wrong? And I believe you are doing this project in partnering with Australia. So they have done this in the context of when it came to news publishers, where the content of the news publishers, which was being used by search, by say these large social network companies, by search engine providers, etc., to negotiate and come at a fair cost sharing, because the news media companies were crying hoarse that their content is being used without them being compensated. And so Australia was the front runner in bringing out what is known as decentralized regulation, where there would be a negotiation between the content provider and the infrastructure layer in that ecosystem, and would be the arbitrator would be the regulator. So that's one area which I see needs much more debate than just a polarized ideological game between the big tech companies and the telecom companies. And I guess projects such as these and experiences such as these, the Australian experience with the newspaper, news publishers, the search engines and the social network providers could be useful. To give you an example, in South Korea, the Netflix traffic, for instance, exploded 24 times overnight on broadband networks beginning in 2021. So this is a very good example, necessitating a major and immediate upgrade, which could only be used for Netflix data. So there are 5 million, and I'm talking about 2021, 5 million of South Korea's 23 million broadband subscribers watch Netflix. So you and the numbers would be far more skewed when it comes to India. So one way to handle that could have been to add a Netflix delivery fee to the broadband bill. However, Netflix wanted the broadband providers either to upgrade to take up or absorb the entire upgradation cost, or spread it across all customers. Now, this itself sounds a little unfair so in some sense, the rich customers, that is the people who watch Netflix and use other OTT services, are being cross-subsidized by the consumer, the set of consumers who are not using the services. Attempts by broadband providers at South Korea telecom regulator to recoup costs failed. Netflix actually sued, arguing that it has no obligation to pay or negotiate for the use of other networks. But Netflix lost, and the case is still in appeal. So in India too, I think going forward, this would be one of the important areas. Second is, of course, if I can speak a little bit on AI and competition issues at this point, or if you want, I can do it at a later stage.
Payal, next round.
Yeah.
No, since you have raised this particular issue of who pays for the investment by the telecom operators, we have discussed in the previous session about applications such as tactile internet, autonomous cars, holographic sensing, and things like that. So these are all applications which require a lot of bandwidth. And so I'll turn to Amrita. There is a view from the telecom service providers to pay fair share for upgrading the investment. So what's your view, especially with respect to content application providers? Because without content, telecom doesn't exist. Without telecom, content doesn't exist. So what's your view on this, Amrita?
Thank you, Professor Sridhar. And it's your question, but before that, I would go to your previous question where we are talking about 6G and what we are looking at from the regulatory perspective. I would say first is learning our lessons from 5G. For example, we are having deployment of 5G, but however, the 5G business cases, the use business cases is still not there. And, I kind of joined earlier to hear the technical discussions also earlier, as well as the policies, findings which Ujjwal shared. And most of them are something which I think we were trying to speak about. I think one thing important is for a user, I am not interested in 5G, 6G, or 7G technology. I am interested in being able to access the content I want, the service delivery I want. My rights are protected. My privacy is protected. I can choose what content I can see without my content being throttled, bottled by any kinds. So for a user perspective, I think those are important. What we see is there is going to be growing cybersecurity issues, data privacy issues in a 6G technology. Cyber privacy issues could be of various kinds. It could be critical network infrastructure, or for example, even the recent Orange Espana attack, wherein one employee's system was hacked and then the password taken. They used the RIPE NCC account of theirs to actually disrupt the services for more than 4 hours. So, since these technologies from 5G is based on software, they are more, I would say, vulnerable to cyber attacks because these are becoming more sophisticated. Obviously, geopolitics is also something which is going to pan out. And I think if we get our data privacy regulations or Digital India Act coming, or even we rehaul our cybersecurity, we would be in the right track. But again, geopolitics would be playing a different role. We would be seeing the blocks strengthening. I don't see geopolitical tensions coming down by 2020, 2030. So those are certain critical things. Now, as an individual user, for example, the other thing is AI, which was raised. AI governance is going to take a lot of precedence, primarily because AI governance is being talked at every forum. As in OECD has its principles, or everyone's got, the G7 is coming up with something, the Hiroshima Pact, for example, and everyone's coming, EU is come up with their own AI principles, etc. But the interoperability between them is important. And, the UN has also formed the high-level board on AI, which is discussing. So governance of AI, governance of emerging tech. For example, with quantum technology, you may have issues with encryption. How do you enhance your encryption then? So those are the kind of questions which would come. Perhaps best practices we could learn from places and then make it more Indianized, because India is a different country. With the promotions the government is giving to startups, etc., we can expect to see more, innovative services coming. Now, coming to your question on content and telecom, and that has been our position always, is they have a symbiotic relationship. It is not as if one goes against the other. One lives, the other lives. If one doesn't live, the other doesn't live. Having been said that they are symbiotic, there are investments which everyone is making. Now, telecoms today are in an issue in India, primarily because there are various issues. For example, the spectrum costs. It's the highest in the world. Everyone knows about it. They are having issues in right of way. The business case is not there. How many people are actually using 5G today? It's the gamers. The speaker was saying most people do not have a 5G handset, but where is the business case? We need to have those business cases for this particular technology to thrive and go to the places where we want it to be. So I think we need to work on those, then we will get it right, because we are an aspiring nation, and everyone's looking at us. If you look at Africa, you look at Latin America, you look at all the developed global majority, they are looking at us. Coming to it, there are investments. Investments are made by everyone. It is, if we are looking at the content we look at content just from some particular companies, say, for example, X, moving through a telecom cable to me. That's not it. There is much more to it. This is a bigger ecosystem. I think if we want to understand the ecosystem and see where the costs are, and it is just not the content providers and the telecom providers who are submitting. It starts even from, taking the domain name to the IP addresses everyone is taking, to the cloud service providers, to the the big tech, or even the smaller ones. Why should I even talk about just big techs? There are others who are doing it. Then you have the telecom infrastructure coming in, which is the last mile conduit to reach to the user. So there is an entire ecosystem. And normally when you see the analysis which is shared by everyone, it is piecemeal. The content providers would be saying something, the telecom providers are saying something, but they do agree it's a symbiotic relationship. Now, in a symbiotic relationship, there needs to be, the cost needs to be understood, and these are business cases. They need to look at it. Having said that, I slightly differ from Payalji, because I think network neutrality is important, primarily because I, as a user, should be able to choose my content, not the telecom company, or not the, say, for example, the content provider, as to, since I have a good handshake, my content will move first and the others will not move. That is my choice, and that should not come. And that's the basic of net neutrality, wherein any content, any packet in the network flows at the same level. So, and looking at the network usage fees, Professor Sridhar, since you've been looking at telecom for so many years, it comes up, pops up in various avatars over the years. For example, it came out in ITU, it was pushed back. It came up again, it was pushed back. EU extensively discussed it. And if you look at the paper, they have not come up with anything conclusive, and they put it back for, discussing it later. Yes, South Korea has introduced it, but then you are also seeing the South Korean government and the regulators saying they will relook at it, because companies like Twitch, etc., are exiting. Now, that's not catching someone on the throat. That is primarily because, being a gaming country, South Korea, what actually happens is it affects their gamers, because they have pride in that. That's a business model for them. And there may be, it's a value proposition for them. And what's happening in South Korea, people are routing their, because of, that kind of charges which is coming, and they have fancy terms for everything. People are routing it through Japan. Now, would you want a customer to get that latency? So you will also have to look at those issues. It's not a 0-1 game. It's quite a gray area. And I think extensive analysis needs to be done on the entire ecosystem of how a data packet moves from one end to the other. And I will end it there. Thank you.
Professor Sridhar, just one point can I make in response to what Amrita said?
Quick one, Payal, so that
just 1 minute. Yeah. So this fair use charge is not mean that you compromise on net neutrality principles. That's exactly what my point was. Net neutrality is a very broad concept. So paid prioritization, throttling, etc., remain. So the core principles of soft net neutrality remain, and a fair use charge where the content providers are sharing some costs. I absolutely agree the ecosystem needs to be analyzed and how that needs to be done. It's a regulatory question, and that's a regulatory question which one should look at. A ban is a blunt regulatory instrument. So net neutrality remains. I'm not against net neutrality. I'm for net neutrality, but net neutrality should not become the instrument to not even bring this to the discussion table. Thank you.
Thank you.
Payal, just to add, if you ask certain for the data flow which happens in the pipe and how much of that is actually the so-called big content provider and how much is spam, you will understand what actually happens in the pipe. Because a customer, for example, and I don't mean to take any names. For example, if I am a Facebook user and I am using a Facebook content, or my mother is using Facebook and she's using it, she's using because she wants to use that content. For that only she's using, she's paying her bills every month. Or I'm making, or my mother, who's like 76 plus, she's using WhatsApp because that makes the calls easier than a telecom call for whatever reason, or it is more secured, encrypted, etc. That is my choice. However, there is content flowing within that pipe which is not anyone using. And those are the data which you would find with organizations like.
But that's a different issue because I am for net neutrality. So I just wanted
to I'm
clarify.
talking about when we are talking about network usage fees or high traffic generators, there is much more higher traffic going in the network, which is spam, which is something which you don't want, which is actually generating. And you ask any network people or technical people, that is where it is. But again,
the point is, well taken, Amrita. Yeah. So we have to look at apart from the genuine traffic, non-genuine traffic as well. So a point is very well taken. Now over to Srimati Meenakshi Agarwal from IIT. In the last panel discussion, we have had everyone speaking highly about government's initiative on 6G vision document was published in March of 2023. And we have taken some sort of a lead through the organizations such as TSDSI in order to promote Indian standards to 3GPP. So what's your view, madam, on government's view on how to take the 6G vision forward? Can you please throw some light on that, madam?
Yes, sir. Sir, actually, I had thought that I will speak about this in the second part of the question. So would you like me to first answer this question or my views on the regulatory and ethical dimensions that will emerge? So
maybe you can discuss about this government's vision, madam. That will be appropriate now.
Okay, sir. So the Indian government, it has been making several efforts to promote the research and development on next generation communication technologies, which is being carried out by Ministry of Electronics and IT, the Department of Telecommunications, and by Department of Science and Technologies. So these initiatives support the development of 6G IPR, including standards, essential patents, chipsets, cyber physical systems, 6G R&D prototypes, software stacks, and more, and initiatives of government such as C-DOT Collaborative Research Program and the Telecom Technology Development Fund scheme further promote indigenous innovation and technology transfer in telecommunications. Now, Bharat 6G Alliance aims to shift India from technology consumer to technology producer nation. To further strengthen its position in the global telecom space, Honorable Minister of Communications had stated that India aims to have 10% of the intellectual property rights in 6G technology by 2029-2030. Further, the goals of the government are to enable India to become a leading global supplier of IP products and solutions of affordable 5G, 6G, and future telecom solutions. And further R&D efforts which were made in 5G and beyond technologies funded by the government led to many firsts in India in the field of communications, such as contributions for defining the framework for IMT 2030 and beyond. In the IMT 2030 meeting held in Geneva in 2023, Indian researchers from academia and officials from private companies they were able to contribute significantly. And India introduced the usage scenario of ubiquitous connectivity for IMT 2030. So this usage scenario, coupled with the new capability of coverage, enables the development of 6G technology that provides affordable connectivity and broadband services with extended coverage to rural and sparsely populated areas. And the Bharat 6G vision also envisages India to play a pivotal role in the design, development, and deployment of 6G technology by 2030. And other than this, the government has also been funding projects on standardization, particularly on 5G and beyond and 6G, for contributions to be made at 3GPP and ITU. So that is an ongoing activity, and I feel that this would be continued by the government to be able to create a 6G ecosystem in the country. So these are the initiatives of the government.
So thank you very much, madam. So I'll turn to Professor Rohit Prasad later. Just to turn to Isha, you've worked on ACPs. We have a lot of growing concerns about intellectual property, especially with respect to mobile technologies in 5G and 6G. So there have been some disputes on SEP, standard essential patents. The FRAND conditions are not being adhered to, especially by the multinational large telecom equipment manufacturers. So what is your view on moving, when we are moving towards 6G, it's going to be a lot of intellectual activity which will be going on. There'll be a lot of IPs which will be generated. So how do you think we can manage this whole ecosystem and then bring them to contribute to ACPs, for example?
Hi, thank you, Professor Sridhar. So I'll probably just respond to your SEP question, and then probably if I have time, I'll set the context. In addition to just the SEP debate, I think there are a host of issues when we look at 5G and beyond and 6G. So and I'll talk to you more from the India angle, because when Ericsson and all those standard essential patent disputes were happening in India, one of the things that one found out was that SEPs are actually a tool that is used by a dominant entity to also thwart competition. And that has a lot of, and something that even Ujjwal alluded to when he talked about jurisdictional issues, right? When you look at fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms, that usually is whenever you are at a standard setting organization, these are self-declared IPs or self-declared patents. The terms of the agreement are that you will agree to give your standard essential patents at fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms. But you really don't know what those fair, reasonable, and non-discriminatory terms are. And there is enough evidence and literature, scholarly literature from the world over, which posits that what is fair, reasonable for, say, a European market may not be fair and reasonable for an Indian market. And what we also saw during the SEP litigations that happened in India at that point in time was that a lot of these behemoths hide behind confidentiality clauses, or they use, because they know that the only option, or the monopolist is the only option for these smaller companies in India, like we saw with Micromax, Eyeball. There were a host of litigations. Xiaomi. The first thing they do is that they get an infringement. They sort of get an order from the Delhi High Court. And that litigation takes a lot of time away, especially when there is a litigation in a very tech-intensive sector, and the first mover or the winner take all outcomes that we often talk about. And that time period is often very critical. On the other hand, you'd see the entity holding the maximum amount of SEPs saying that if you want access, you have to sign this confidentiality agreement, even if you want to look at the amount of SEPs we hold in this, and you have to take all of these on an FRAND terms or on a RAND terms. And the party has no option but to either sign that agreement, because they also can't look at whether they need royalty and whether they need to pay royalty for all of those patents or not. And I think that is something that we need to settle. Even with 6G, with 5G, India lost the SEP race to China. Even with 6G, there are already sort of, one has read reports which says that US and China are leading in filing of patents already. So we are already behind the curve when it comes to filing of patents and then grant of patents, and then essentially, declaring them at any of these standard setting organizations. So for starters, investing more in research and development is definitely more important. But I think there also needs to be a global conversation about what really are we talking about when we talk about these FRAND terms. who are these reasonable and non-discriminatory terms more about? And these confidentiality arrangements or clauses that these big companies are able to hide behind, I think, is also a big problem, as one has seen. And litigation always comes with a market cost, because you're late to the market, or you might be an entrant to the market and you get this infringement, you can't really be selling your devices. It has a huge sort of economic cost also, which you need to be wary of when we are looking at SEPs, or when you're looking at IP as the only way forward for innovation. I think as a society, we probably need to also step back and understand, what do we mean by innovation, or what do we mean by state of the art? And there needs to be more discussion and debate about some of these issues. Apart from that, I think, and also to your opening remarks about 6G and the issues that one sees is, and this is based on, I know you said that, you're basically anticipating what happens in the next 10 years, and it's more like crystal gazing, but I'll still take a shot at it if I can. One is that you'd see an immersive sort of environment, right? Like it'll be an environment where you see the physical and the digital realm sort of combines, or you're immersed, and you don't know when one ends and the other begins. And therefore, the sort of problems that one already is seeing with convergence of technology, I think those are going to exacerbate. When I say issues that we're already seeing, I mean the massive amount of data that is being collected, the massive amount of data that is being shared with your consent, without your consent, and that is going to increase exponentially. I think 10 years ago, the debate was about privacy and, right to privacy. Today, the questions are around decisional autonomy. What does that disparate sharing of data lead you to? How does it manipulate you? How much control and agency does an individual have today? I mean, how much of the shopping decisions that you're making are because you want to shop for a particular thing, or it's because you saw that crop up on an Insta reel and you're buying? But these are again going to amplify because you're going to be constantly connected, or as Gitanjali ma'am was mentioning, ubiquitous connectivity. The other, and some of them are very thoroughly studied, and I'll delve deeper into probably some of the measures we could adopt. But I also think there are a lot of understudied harms, like psychosocial harms, addiction, abuse of power. And by abuse of power, I mean the data behemoths that we have of the big tech that Payal ma'am was earlier alluding to. When they already have access to that amount of data, what do they do with it? And then lastly, I think within the, and I think again, Ujjwal tried alluding to it when he was talking about the net neutrality angle. I think when you use the use of AI within networks and the ability of networks to be making their traffic management practices based on an algorithm, what will that do to your underlying or core net neutrality principles as we currently understand it? And if not, then do we need to go back to the drawing board and to first principles and understand that, okay, this is what is permissible, this is what is not permissible? And I think these are going to be very, very important and complicated questions. I'd be lying if I tell you that there are answers to this right now. But in general, I think that there needs to be more thought and intentionality behind what we are doing when we are looking at the next generation of technologies.
You later. So over to you, Dr. Rohit Prasad. Amrita and Payal already mentioned about the larger digital ecosystems that we have today. For example, as we moved from 4G to 5G, the whole ecosystem has changed. The content and application providers, cloud developers, the open RAN architecture provided by some of the cloud service providers have become important in the ecosystem. So the whole ecosystem is going to become wider, broader, when we move towards 6G with applications such as, tactile internet and things like that coming into picture. So how do you see, for example, the regulatory landscape evolving? Should we think about new types of regulatory interventions with respect to competition, or should we say status quo? So what's your view on this in the larger digital ecosystem that's going to come into play? Over to you, Rohit.
Thanks, Sridhar. So here I will basically talk about some of the work that we have done together, you and I. So my view is that in 5G and certainly perhaps even in 6G, the distinction that we make between telecom service providers and content and application service providers is no longer going to be valid. Yes, they are symbiotic in nature. Their connection is symbiotic in nature, but there are many new elements in their relationship, new elements of competition which have emerged and which will continue to evolve. And that's because the telecom network today is no longer just a radio equipment led network, but it is a software and storage as well as radio equipment run network. And content and application providers, which are of course great at software, are playing key roles in various parts of the communication network, as are storage companies. And therefore, there is a host of new entities in the connectivity value chain. And therefore, the traditional relationship between telecom companies and content companies as upstream and downstream companies is transforming. The second point, which is changing the relationship, is the growth of substitute services provided by content companies, such as voice over internet protocol in lieu of traditional voice telephony services. And finally, and most importantly, the emergence of uh, walled gardens or end-to-end ecosystems, which comprise device connectivity, content, and application providers, which are competing with other such ecosystems. For example, the Apple ecosystem competing with the Google ecosystem. And in each of these ecosystems, the market power often is vested in a platform captain uh, who is able to earn the lion's share of the surplus of that ecosystem. And since this ecosystem consists of telecom service providers as well as content and content companies, there is an element of rivalry between them in terms of who plays the role of platform captain. Now, therefore, what we have called this really is that we are in an integrated sphere of cooperation between telecom companies and content companies. It is not just the simple symbiotic relationship. It is an integrated sphere of cooperation as well as competition. And along with this, the emergence of this integrated sphere of cooperation, there is also changing drivers of regulation in the two industries. In the past, the telecom service providers have justifiably faced a higher burden of regulation for several reasons, including their role as licensees for the provision of essential communication services, which comes with spectrum rights, right of way for physical infrastructure, and the use of the national numbering scheme. And also because of the oligopolistic nature of telecom markets on account of the high initial capital required. So there has been a higher regulatory burden on them, right? On the other hand, the vision of the content company is that, still that of the garage startup, which has low barriers to entry, and therefore there should be light touch regulation, there should be net neutrality regulation, and so on. However, that has changed completely today. Today, certain content companies can also be considered essential from a strategic point of view. For example, Google has played an important role in the security architecture of the United States. Also, internet markets have become highly concentrated with winner takes all model, and therefore only companies with the ability to expend large amounts of capital survive. Thus, similar regulatory factors are at play for both telecom companies and content companies. So if we take these two things together, the fact that we are in an integrated sphere of cooperation between telcos and content companies, and that there are similar regulatory factors at play, what it implies is that we need to move to a similar regulatory approach towards these two entities. Of course, the regulatory approach cannot be identical because there will be continuing dissimilarities. For example, the regulation of content companies requires the regulation of free speech, privacy, security, and so on, in a manner that is not applicable to telecom companies. Similarly, telecom companies will continue to have access to public resources that, like spectrum, that content companies will not have access to, although of course they have access to unlicensed spectrum. So what we have called, Sridhar, you and I have called this approach, which basically recognizes that we need to move to similar principles of regulation while continuing to recognize similarities where relevant. We've called this the principle of diagonal equity between telecom companies and content companies. And so I just wanted to put that on the table, the principle of diagonal equity. And of course, in a 6G world with even more new entities entering, one will have to include those entities into this regulatory approach of diagonal equity. I will end with just remarking that I really appreciated the points that Isha was making about how radically different the world of 6G could be by the time we reach 2030, and how it could lead to a radical shift in our, not just in our commerce, but also in our politics. And Isha, if I may add, I'm not just scared of big corporations having access to our data, but also of governments having access to our data. With that, I'll just end and then we can take it from there.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rohit. If there are any questions from in person, I can take it at this point of time. Otherwise, we'll just do one quick round on the diagonal equity, the kind of regulation that we need to apply across the different actors in the digital ecosystem. So there are some regulatory principles that are applied for content and application providers, some for probably cloud hosting services, some for telcos, and so on. So is this a method that we need to go forward with respect to 6G and other emerging technologies? What is your view on that, Payal, for a 1 minute quick shot at it?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks, Rohit. You summed it up extremely well, especially the model of co-optation. And that there has to be, and that is how at least sophisticated models of regulation are moving, where it is a participatory regulation, where stakeholders sit across the table with the regulators, and some kind of, so the regulatory architecture should also not be in silos. So it should not be, say, and that's why a whole of government approach, which is now a very, very good buzzword, and it has caught on the fancy of Indian government also. So this diagonal equity approach would only happen if there is a whole of government approach to the entire regulatory architecture. So it's not just competition. So it should be competition, data protection, access rules, net neutrality principles, etc., and see how do they fit in with each other in order to, after all, what do you need? We need, and from a competition perspective, we need a competitive, fair, contestable ecosystems. So how are these ecosystems working? And is there an ecosystem in which there is concentration and there is an orchestrator who is dictating that ecosystem? If there is an orchestrator which is dictating that ecosystem, certain tinkering would have to be done. And there could be, I know MIT is very, very seriously thinking, they have come out with the Non-Personal Data Protection Committee report, the Krish Gopalakrishnan report, and but there need to be more rules on how that non-personal data framework, such that sharing of the data in order to democratize that space. So to your diagonal equity, I'll just add the diagonal equity regulatory principles should have one objective, and that objective should be to democratize the space and not lead to the same wrongs of concentrating ecosystems. And we economists have been saying that these ecosystems are concentrated because economies of scope, network effects, scale, etc. But within that framework also, this diagonal equity regulatory principle can bring in democratization.
So, Madam Meenakshi Agarwal, so your view on how MeitY and other, is working along with the other ministries such as Department of Telecommunication and Ministry of Consumer Affairs, in order to sort of provide a very robust regulatory structure for the emerging technologies. Can you please highlight?
Yes, sir. Sir, the government, as part of the Bharat 6G vision, has initiated setting up of 6G test bed, and MeitY also has initiated R&D projects in 6G technology for early prototyping and IPR generation in 6G areas, which will result in 6G SCPs. And it will also help Indian telcos and vendors to take a lead in 6G product development and for demonstration of a fully operational link, which will be a high-speed communication link of 6G. Also, the government has initiated international collaboration with National Science Foundation of US for promoting research and development activities in areas such as next generation communication systems, cybersecurity, sustainability and green technologies, and intelligent transportation systems. So the focus of the government now is to promote technology transfer and commercialization, and it has taken several steps to encourage innovation and facilitate knowledge sharing, and including enacting policies and regulations and launching initiatives to encourage manufacturing also in India, and to create a 6G ecosystem in the country that shall achieve equitable deployment of 6G across the nation. International cooperation with SDOs and regulatory agencies is also crucial for creation of global standards relevant to 6G technology. And privacy and cybersecurity laws will need to be tightened in response to the increasing complexity of 6G networks, and to promote environmental sustainability and lessen the environmental impact of 6G infrastructure. Rules and policies that promote the use of energy efficient technologies are also being thought of and shall be put in place. So that's all, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, madam. So the last word from Isha on, how, for example, these diverse regulations that are coming up in India, especially Digital India Act, Telecom Act, and you have DPDP. How do you see synergies across this when technologies are expanding exponentially?
Thank you. I think, as Professor Payal was also saying, that we have to move out of our silos. And when I say break open the silos, I think we need to look at it from two prongs. One is, of course, that there has to be better regulatory coordination. And I think UK is doing a very interesting experiment where they have the Digital Regulation Cooperation Forum, where they have their three regulators, which is Ofcom, ICO, and the Competition Markets Authority. And they've developed an agency which meets regularly, has these 6 objectives where it's realized that with convergence, they also need to exchange best practices more, inform each other more. And that's also something that in India we need to develop and invest further in, because I still feel, even though there is this intention where the government does say that it has to talk more or there has to be interministerial coordination, when it really comes down to walking the talk, I really feel that they haven't put the money where their mouth is, right? And therefore, you'll see that there are a lot of regulatory turf wars in India. And I'm sure it's not just an Indian phenomenon, but it is a problem. And going forward, it will continue to be a problem. But the other thing I also feel is that each stakeholder is important, right? Like whenever we are looking at the digital economy, government and state is an important stakeholder, but so are the end consumers. So is the private sector, and so is the civil society. And I do feel that there has to be more stakeholder and diverse stakeholder participation for us to come up with a more nuanced sort of policy making. Lastly, I think that we also have to do away with this surprise policy making. Like you can't really be having bills at the 11th hour where you do not really have the time to comment, you don't have time to engage in more detailed discussion, because ultimately that's where I think the leakage happens. Fourth, I think what will be important, and as Professor Sridhar was also, Professor Rohit was also talking about government having access to data. I think it already has amassed a lot of data. Therefore, we also need to look at separation of power as a very, very important tenet of whenever we are looking at policy making and regulation in this space. So when we are also looking at regulatory agency, we should make sure that we have an independent regulatory agency by design. And that means that it should again be more representative in nature. It should not only have government appointed representatives, it should have multi-stakeholder and diverse representation. Otherwise, whatever how much effort you make in lawmaking and rulemaking, it will again not have the intended objectives. It will always be prone to capture either by private interest or by state interest. And I do think that's something that we need to be very, very cautious about. And lastly, I also think that the onus is on private sector. And it's very interesting that a lot of technologists or tech bros, as you often call them, you speak to, they'll always look at ethics as a suspicious word or a suspicious terminology. And I think that needs to break, because for any sort of leap forward, we have to have more trust even in the technology that we're using. And that will never happen unless they meet the ethicists, the government, the civil society halfway. And I think that is something that more work needs to be done on. And I think with that, I'll rest. I don't know if they were good last words, but yeah, those would be my last
Good point. Good point, Isha. So over to you, Rohit. Last word, right? How to build trustworthy ecosystem, digital ecosystem, as Isha has said. How do you trust all the stakeholders? What is the magic bullet?
I think Isha's word is the best last word. Yeah, it's. I have just, I've just brought out a book called The Last Dance of Rationality, and I'm rather pessimistic. Pessimistic is a wrong word to use, maybe, but nervous about how the power of surveillance that 6G technologies is going to create, how that will be used by governments and large corporations to and so I'm willing to join any effort, any initiative to create guardrails and separation of powers, all whatever you want to do in order to prevent that from happening. So I'm with you.
So thank you very much. I think we are running out of time, and thanks to all the panelists for taking time off to join this interesting discussion. I think it has been a very interesting discussion so far. There are a lot of online attendees as well as in-person attendees. So we thank all the panelists for their time and effort on behalf of IIIT Bangalore, CUTS International, and RP. We conclude this session, and unfortunately we give mementos, but we are unfortunate that you are not able to be in person to get the mementos. Thank you very much.
And my greetings to my fellow panelists as well.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So thank you, Ujjwal, and we close the workshop, and then we will be sharing the notes with the panelists as well as you, and then we'll take it forward. Thanks very much for all the online attendees for joining this workshop, and hope to take this forward. We will be coming out with reports on the 4 research components, and we'll be sharing with you through your email addresses that you have registered with. Thank you very much.